Hello, everyone, and welcome to the annual Avocado GamesCast year-end extravaganza. We're recording this at the tail end of 2024, so it'll probably be out in early 2025, at which point you may even be playing some of 2025's earliest releases. But no matter, consider this an opportunity to take a look back at the year that was in gaming. We'll start by discussing some of the announcements at the 2024 Game Awards, hosted by fellow Canuck Jeff Keighley. Then we'll discuss one of the biggest news stories of the year, studio closures. After that, we'll throw it on over to our community to tell us about their favorite games of the year. And finally, we'll return to talk about our best, worst, and most surprising games of 2024. But before we dive into all of that, let's get acquainted. I am Merve, and joining me, he wishes his Alluvian would take him to the local Bojangles. It's the Kappa.
Hey, Bojangles, that's a deep cut, man. That's some really regional stuff. I'm very impressed.
I have lived in the States before, but I've never actually been to North Carolina.
Come on down.
He once tried to argue that visiting Peggy's Cove is a type of retro game. It's LittleMac.
Party people.
And finally, making his podcast debut, he has negotiated with more demons than he's slain. It's Drinking with Skeletons.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
We're all doing great.
Doing great. Merv, I just want to throw out there that of your ad lib introductions, I think that was your one for me just now was one of my favorite. I laughed at it when I read it in your notes, and then I sincerely laughed again when you said
Don't
it.
give away the tea. We don't want people to think we prepared for this. What notes?
Yeah.
Oh no, don't worry, folks. Merv prepared for this, but none of the rest of us.
I never prepared the intro. That's a lie. I always prepare the intro. I actually went to Peggy's Cove this past summer for the first time in my life, and basically just went to the lobster shack and gorged on a lobster roll. I figure that's what you're supposed to do when you go there.
Probably, I'm a little weird in that case because I'm a vegetarian, and I actually never had lobster before I became a vegetarian, which I guess is probably even weirder.
Oh yeah.
For a maritimer.
They do have like a vegetarian like salad thing. You can get there. They have maple coffee. I'd never had coffee with maple syrup in my life before I had it there.
I know there's like a type of vegetarian where you do eat fish. Is there one for shellfish too?
I think pescatarians.
pescatarian would,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think they eat I think they eat whatever comes from the sea.
Yeah.
And I have nothing against pescatarians as long
I'm
as they
just
call
curious,
themselves
like, if you were-
pescatarians. I get it's a subject of contention when pescatarians call themselves vegetarians. And they're like, oh, but I
Yeah.
eat fish.
Like that.
Yeah, okay.
They're pescatarian.
That's
Just like own it,
stolen
right?
valor. You can't do that.
Well, you got plenty of sea beans and kelp out there to eat, so it's all good.
Is that real?
Sea beans? Yeah, they're known by different terms at different parts of the world. So they're called sea beans in on the East Coast, but I don't know what they're called elsewhere. I know it's one of those plants that's known by like 50 different names depending on where you are. Like the other example is like what we call wild garlic up here. You guys in the States would call ramps.
Oh yeah.
Things like that. So we'll look that up for the link dump. We'll figure out what sea beans are called in various places around the world.
Are they like sea grapes?
Sean Bean talking sea beans.
Oh, sea grapes are a different thing, I believe. I mean, they're all aquatic plants, I guess. Although kelp is not technically a plant, but we don't have to get into botany or biology right now. We're here to talk about video games. So, Game Awards. I wrote the agenda of the Game Awards 2023, so you know how good I am at copy pasting. We could talk about last year and how garbage it was, but we're going to talk about the Game Awards this year. This year, Astrobot won Game of the Year. I don't know. Did any of you guys play Astrobot?
Yeah,
have
I
not.
think it's excellent.
Yeah.
Oh, it's excellent.
It's basically Super Mario Galaxy 3.
That sounds really exciting. As someone who's played just a little bit of Super Mario Galaxy 1, I am excited to eventually get to Astrobot when I guess shell out for a PS6 down the line.
Yeah. PS6 Pro Plus Champion
Yeah, it'll
Edition.
probably come to Steam sooner or later at this rate.
Yeah. Then you gotta wait a month for it to be optimized, but then you should be good.
Oh yeah, if it ever comes to Steam, I'll play it. because I am a fan of platformers. But a lot of things were announced at the Game Awards this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering what caught your folks' eyes. I have a few, but I want to hear from you folks first. What you thought was interesting in terms of the announcements came out of the Game Awards. Because, this is really the trailer show at the end of the day.
Yeah, the trailers.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like, especially this year. I mean, I know we complain every year about the award just kind of being a toss-off, but like this year, really, yeah.
Yeah.
The first one I wrote down that I don't know, maybe other people were mentioning, but I kind of had seems like it went a little bit on the radar was Mafia: The Old Country.
Oh, yeah.
I've enjoyed the Mafia series, I think, more than most people. I liked it as a Grand Theft Auto kind of replacement, but also kind of the way it kind of deals a little bit with like more important issues, maybe in a way, throwing around time skips and stuff like that. I'm kind of optimistic about this. I wasn't negative on 3. I feel like 3 kind of bit off more than it could chew a little bit with some of what was going on. The setting and the complicated like racial politics and stuff like that going on, but 1 and 2 are great games. 3 I thought was enjoyable but a little complicated, but taking it back to that kind of like 1900s Sicily origin of a mafia type thing, I think is a really it's kind of fertile ground for a mafia. Even I don't even know if I've seen many movies that were set like in that time frame of a mafia setup, so I thought that could be really
Yeah,
cool.
other than Goncharov, I don't know of any.
Jesus Christ.
But yeah, it's super excited they're going back to Sicily. And the really interesting thing is that they're not doing an Italian dub for it. And everyone's like, that's crazy. How are you not doing an Italian dub for a game set in Italy? It's actually, the dialogue's going to be in Sicilian.
Yeah, I thought that was really
Oh,
cool.
wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And they really look like they're, I mean, even down to like the lighting and stuff looks like they're really going for like a period reenactment thing. And hitting that authenticity mark, I think, is what Mafia does best in some ways. I remember when Mafia 1 came out, people were, of course, comparing it to GTA, and they were like, the cars are so slow and they handle, and people were like, yeah, what the fuck? It's like you think you're driving like a Model T. Of course it sucks. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think they're going to still kind of push for that authenticity angle, and I really like the idea behind that. But that was one I kind of felt maybe slipped a little through the cracks, but I'm excited for it.
Yeah. Skeletons, what about you? What are you excited for that got announced at the Game Awards?
For me, it's definitely Okami 2. I love Okami. Anyone listening to this, I did a review a while back, years ago at this point, on the Avocado, if you want to read my thoughts in more depth there. But I'm excited about that one. I'll have more to say about this when we talk about the studio closures because of what's going on with all of that. But I was also struck by not just that they went to the trouble of, bringing Hideki Kamiya back to it, but they actually had a big announcement for it. The orchestra
Studio
and
and
everything.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's Jeff Keighley being more into it than maybe I would have thought he would be if Capcom shelled out more money. I just don't really see I don't know. It's a little odd to me.
I think one thing that I noticed this year, and I've been kind of putting in the back of my mind and the other ones, was I do think that there's something about maybe specifically Japanese developers seeing the Game Awards as their chance to get maybe out from under the shadow of the Microsofts and Sony announcements and kind of do something more highlighting their games. And maybe they need that, because otherwise it's just, you get washed away with the Calls of Duties and stuff like that. But it does seem like the Game Awards does kind of have a interesting kind of Japanese focus lately in some of the stuff that they're announcing and showcasing.
Yeah.
True. It helps that Capcom's been on a roll, so they probably have a little bit more money to burn, and maybe take a stab at getting people into something else to piggyback on the success of Monster Hunter and Resident Evil.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because the other one I wanted to talk about was a Capcom one that was almost in the exact same vein. That's Onimusha.
Yes,
I love that series.
I've never played one, but like I said, they've just been on a roll, so I'm down for seeing what their teams will put out.
Yeah, Capcom, I think, is in a weirdly good spot right now with a lot of the stuff they've been announcing.
Yeah, a lot of Japanese publishers right now seem like they're floundering.
Hmm.
Um, Bandai Namco and Square Enix, especially. Konami seems like they're on a bit of an upswing, but who knows how long that'll last. Capcom has just had a solid past like 6, 7 years,
Yeah,
putting out hit
yeah.
after hit, and critically acclaimed game after critically acclaimed game. So I'm very excited to see what they can do with reviving Onimusha, publishing Okami 2. By the way, I find it very funny that Hideki Kamiya's new studio is called Clovers. I
Yeah.
love the audacity of that.
But even like Kunitsugami this year from Capcom kind of flew under the radar, and I think is now getting a little bit of like cult status. It was
Oh,
stuff
yeah.
like that is what they've been kind of really good at doing lately.
Yeah, that was an excellent one.
Yeah, I'm really glad that they're taking whatever financial success they're having from Resident Evil and Monster Hunter and funneling into weird projects like
Hmm.
Kunitsugami. I want to see more unique stuff like this from major
Same.
publishers, like, and have them run the gamut from AAA stuff to smaller titles, because that's how you can stay kind of financially successful going forward. That's how you stay sustainable, is having a variety
Yeah.
of different game types.
That's how
So-
you can avoid having to shut the studio down immediately
Yeah.
after you publish the game because it only sold 10 million copies in the first month.
And
Oh,
I
yeah.
Or a
think
week before it launches, like with Hyenas.
Oh yeah.
I think it's smart too to have different kind of like strata of like sales points too. Like not everything needs to be a $60 AAA or $70 AAA budget game.
Yeah.
Having those $20 and $30 games that can sometimes be breakout hits, pays for other stuff too. I think it's kind of the same lesson that movies are learning right now too. Where if you're making $120 million comedy, maybe that's not the smartest thing right now in this climate, but yeah, um, I think eventually you're going to start to see the like studios that are really knocking out of the park are doing stuff where it's like, we have our $70 game, two or three $30, $40 games, maybe one $20 game, and that's kind of what we're doing. I mean, I don't know what Sony's sales numbers like, but I'd love to see like Power Wash Sims profit margins or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, or Square, sorry, but yeah, some of those smaller games I think can come out of nowhere and be hits.
On that note, what did we all think about that upcoming Elden Ring thing? It looks like a glorified mod.
Well, me and Merv are decidedly anti-From, so I think,
Really? Okay.
yeah, we're not Souls guys. I don't know, right, Merv?
Yeah, like,
I don't want to
I
speak
think
for
it's
you, but
I'll say I think it's interesting that they're taking the world of Elden Ring and doing something else with it.
mhm.
I think this is kind of the way you can. It's almost like an RGG style reinterpretation or reuse of assets to do something fresh. And I think more studios should do stuff like this. Just take what you already got and add some new stuff and repackage it and sell it. And honestly, I think people, aside from a few gamers who are really toxic and are just like, "Oh, you didn't rebuild all the assets from scratch. This should be a $5 game." I think you'll find most gamers are pretty amenable to paying to revisit a world and do something different in it. So
Yeah, the thing I think that would like kind of push me away from it is I'm not good at them, and I was to play with a friend who was, I kind of feel like I'd be holding them back almost, if that makes sense, right? Like,
I'll say this as someone who's really, really good at Souls games.
yeah,
I would love to play with a friend of mine who is not as good and have the added challenge of heroically protecting them. I
Yeah.
can't speak for your
Yeah, that's always a fun thing. Is you get you kind of set up the passwords and you just kind of stroll through as a gank squad and kill everything in front of you.
it'd be like, remember when they did Looter Shooter on AV Club, or not Shooter Tutor?
oh yeah,
Remember that feature?
Yeah, vaguely.
Be like that. Be like Souls Bros. Or I have no name for it.
yeah. I think they picked the wrong shooter for that though.
Oh yeah, it was Destiny. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
you,
right.
you do not want to start with Destiny. You want to start with like
Doom.
like a Halo or something like that.
Yeah. The other one I thought was maybe like my hype of the show. I don't know what we've got a name for it, but Dispatch looked really cool. I thought. I like that aesthetic. I like the idea behind it. It's got some real names behind it, huh? I thought that looked really cool. But I think that one got a lot of people interested
That
in
one's
it.
ex-Telltale folks, right?
Yeah, but it looks like they got away from the QuickTime events, at least from what we saw, but kind of doing like a workplace comedy almost. I don't know.
Yeah.
It looked neat to me. I want to see more, but I mean, what always drove me away from Telltale was one, I felt like a lot of choices didn't matter, of course. But two, I hate QuickTime events. I mean, they are like anti-fun to me. So I want to see where this one goes with some of the ideas now that they're out of the shadow, I guess, of Telltale. If they're going to actually put a little more game into it, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, LittleMac.
Oh, I had nothing but just a friendly yeah.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say, you know what this reminds me of? Do you remember the very short-lived DC sitcom Powerless, starring Vanessa Hudgens and Danny Putty?
I do not.
No.
It was a DC thing?
Yeah. So this is a very
Powerless.
short-lived sitcom that aired on NBC as a mid-season replacement in 2017. It did not last long. It starred Vanessa Hudgens and Danny Putty, Christina Kirk, Ron Funches, and Alan Tudyk, which is like a murderer's
Pretty
row
good
of
crowd,
comedians.
yeah.
And
Marvel also has Damage Control, which I think they've kind of introduced into the MCU a little bit, but it's not the same thing. But same idea, yeah.
yeah, essentially the same
Yeah.
idea, where it's like a sitcom about the cleanup crew.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, so Marvel's Damage Control is the cleanup crew. Powerless is the people who prevent disasters when superheroes start getting in on things. So this seems like it's in that vein of like underpowered people in a superpowered world, and that can be interesting. I hope they don't use Powerless as a model because that show is not good, but it's in that vein.
It's frustrating to me to learn that DC did a show like that when they have the what's it called, Gotham PD, or there was a back before the whole 52 thing, they had a series going that was about the Gotham Police Department, and it was like a gritty sort of police
Like
procedural,
NYPD Blue. I remember.
but
now, yeah.
dealing with like how does it feel to be a cop when like Batman shows up and gets all the glory and stuff like that. It was cool. They should do a show out of that instead.
Yeah,
of making
I
So they were
something
going
else.
to, and they scrapped it.
Oh,
They were probably our sitcom didn't work, so let's not do this really cool police procedural.
yeah, it feels like superhero stuff is kind of floundering a bit these days.
It really is.
One of the other announcements that I thought was really interesting was the new game from Hazelight, Split Fiction,
Yeah.
which looks a lot like It Takes Two. Hopefully with characters that I don't hate. But
was it a specific
Char-
character for you, Merv? I think it was for everybody, right?
look, so the thing about Dr. Hakim, I played it with a mutual friend, and Dr. Hakim reminded us of one of our friends, so it was hilarious to us, and we could not stop laughing. But I also kind of hated him,
Yeah.
even though
Yeah.
our mutual friend in real life is delightful.
I think it's one of those things where like it would have worked in smaller doses. But oh boy, by the end I was like, oh, I'm gonna burn this book when I get out of here.
I never played that one, but I heard once someone describe the protagonist as being divorce pilled, or like
Yeah,
the game
well.
was making them think that divorce was better.
Yeah.
So
They were
they
so
are.
combative and unpleasant to each other.
Yeah, I only played a little bit of it. Me and my partner played like maybe a couple hours before she was like, "All right, this is too much platforming. I can't do this." And yeah, it's about a married couple who are getting divorced, and you spend a little bit of time with them, and you're like, "Yeah, you should definitely, the two of you should get divorced."
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be around the two of you at the same time ever again, including me.
And the book is like maybe like the third main character, and who by the end you are tired of that book. So you're tired of everybody in it. It's kind of
Oh,
a rough
wow.
way to get.
I don't know if
Yeah.
I even
But-
got to the anthropomorphic therapy book.
Oh yeah, but the
That's
game itself is
Yeah,
so
that
much
was
fun.
great. Yeah.
Like the actual gameplay of that game is fantastic.
Yeah, it was pretty fun when I was playing it. But
You know,
Yeah,
it kind of reminds
really
me
grating.
of like the writing in like the later Borderlands, like the Tiny Tina stuff, especially. You know,
Oh,
what I mean?
yeah.
The game is still good, but when you get to a cutscene, you're like next. So,
So that's how I felt about like It Takes Two. I'm hoping
Mhm.
Split Fiction is this displays the same sort of spirit of creativity when it
Yeah.
comes to the gameplay, and just like makes the script tolerable. And if it can succeed at that, it's a Game of the Year candidate for me.
yeah, I
So,
think part of
super
that is
excited.
the voice of the creator kind of shines through a little bit in those games, right? You know, but we'll see. Maybe they can temper it a little bit.
like I thought, A Way Out, which is Hazel Light Studios' first game, that
Sick.
was pretty good.
Yeah.
And The Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, which wasn't that studio but was Joseph Ferris, the
Yeah, over at Star Wars, I
driving
think, at the
force.
time.
That was a lot of fun, and pretty moving. I found.
Yeah, the only thing I didn't like about A Way Out was probably the last 30 minutes of it, where it kind of funnels you down a path that I felt was a little cheap based on the rest of the game. But no, I like that a lot. I played with a couple friends, and it's hard because you want to play it with each friend to see what each different one will do. But once you know a lot of the story and stuff, it's kind of tough to pretend like you didn't, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other one I mentioned or I wrote down was Turok. We got a couple seconds of it. I didn't really look too much to it. What are they're calling it? Origins, I think. So I mean, I'm guessing we're getting a reboot, right?
Yeah, it's
the
a third-person shooter for some
Yeah.
reason.
The dinosaurs in it look fantastic, though. So I don't know. Maybe they just lean really into that crazy mythos that Turok has. But Turok is one that never seems to go away. I think there's been like 10 different publishers of it too. So it's like one of those like switches hands every couple of years. Somebody makes a game, it sucks, then they sell it to somebody else. But like to see kind of where this one lands.
It's easy to see how you keep getting funding for
Yeah.
the concept of first-person shooter, and also there's just dinosaurs everywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Okay. Great. I'll play that.
But
it
then like
sucks.
every time they do it, it's like the game sucks, and then they delist the game, and you can't find it anywhere, and nobody knows who owns the rights, and then some studio sells something, and we actually have Turok, we're gonna make a game, and it's just kind of this weird spiral. But yeah, it's kind of, let's see what happens with it, I guess, is my line of thinking.
I wish we'd got an update on that game that's coming out that's just Alien Isolation, but it's Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
I haven't heard about that in a long while.
Yeah, that was kind of a theme with the Game Awards. A lot of missing stuff that I think people thought for sure would be there, but wasn't. But I don't know. I think Merve, you think mostly that these days people want to announce it at their own, like the equivalent of like their Nintendo Directs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of coming along to that too. This is more maybe like indie and Japanese games, and you're getting less of like the real big announcements from your Microsofts and Sony type studios.
I think the
I didn't
major.
see any of this. Oh, you go.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think the major platform holders, your Sony's, Microsofts, and Nintendos, don't really need the Game Awards or Summer Game Fest. But your mid-sized publishers, your Capcoms, your Keplers, your Sabers, etc. I think those guys really need something like this because they can't really get enough attention if they run their own showcase during the summer or at this time of year. If all eyes are on the Game Awards, it's a good place to get those eyeballs. Sorry, LittleMac, I interrupted you.
I was just going to say that I didn't see any of this myself, but was there another cycle of anticipation and disappointment? People thinking there'd be a Silk Song, a Hollow Knight Silk Song.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh yeah.
At this point, I think those people are on kind of like they need to be talked from the ledge every time there's a game event, because it's always like, this is it, this is the one, this rumored person said that they saw this. It's becoming Duke Nukem meme like at this point.
I'm just not going to be worrying about like one day I will fire up my Switch 3 and it'll be there in the eShop and I'm just going to get it. Great. And I'll be very happy on that day, but I'm just going to not really think about it too much until then.
That's what's going to happen too. I think it's just going to
Stop
come
hurting
out.
yourself.
It's just gonna shadow drop on like Switch 5.
They're going to do the Nintendo thing. Maybe they'll even get in a direct for Nintendo to be like, and this is on the eShop now.
You know, I think the jaw dropper was supposed to be Intergalactic, the Heretic Prophet. That trailer left me really cold, honestly. Something about the product placement and the kind of quippiness and just, I don't know. I'm guessing that we're, you know, I think they said that you're stranded on a planet. I don't know. What were your takeaways on that trailer?
I think I need to see actual gameplay to judge it.
Yeah. According to Wikipedia, premise: Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet is an action-adventure game set thousands of years in the future in an alternate universe where advanced space travel existed by 1986. I guess that's important for some reason.
Porsche's making spaceships and
then
like, culture just stayed frozen since 1986. And we just like kept like the neon and the synths. Like, don't get me wrong, I love me some 80s era Rush, but like it's crazy to think that thousands of years later we're still listening to Power Windows. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I can't get this title is just killing me. Intergalactic: The Heretic Prophet. That needed a little more work.
that one needed to go back into the oven, and bake a little. You know, the worst people on the internet have the problem with the character, but something about just the.
Oh no! What's wrong with the character?
Not.
Oh, is it a woman named Jordan?
That's...
Oh no! I just saw Jordan and didn't realize.
Of
having to play a girl in a video game.
People don't like women existing.
Yeah,
it's a whole thing.
Yeah,
but something about it I feel like if this was one of the trailers that came out initially for Starfield, people would have shit all over it, you know, because it's Bethesda. Like, oh, what is this? You know, I get that Naughty Dog gets a little more leeway for what they've put out, but there was something about this trailer. I was like, this is all wrong to me. But yeah, we'll see what happens.
I guess my takeaway is, you know, they made Uncharted and The Last of Us, and the game is probably going to be decent to play. But like, would Uncharted be considered a great game if it hadn't or a great franchise if it hadn't been kind of inexplicably popular? Like, it's fine, but like, you don't actually do any climbing. People hate the climbing now. Nathan Drake is just kind of a generic quippy guy. The plots don't really make any sense when you think about it. Or are actively goofy in ways that people never talk about. So I don't know. I think it'll be fine. Maybe this will be one of those cases where, you know, people have finally had enough of their shtick.
Yeah, I could see that because I remember, you know, being an old man and everything. I remember kind of when Uncharted first came around, it was Dude Raider. Remember they kept calling it Dude Raider, and it was this is a very generic Tomb Raider ripoff, right? And then it kind of came around into its own, and I think a lot of that was like the voice acting, the cast, the polish levels, right? If the movie parts of Uncharted really started to shine, but I don't think the gameplay was ever that great. I don't think the gameplay in Last of Us is that good, to be honest with you.
I played a bit of The Last of Us and was enjoying the story, but I found it utterly just like, you're asking me to invest in this story in a gritty, like realistic world, and then every few minutes I come across like a place where they've strewn waist-high barriers at weird angles to create a cover shooter level. Yeah.
It becomes very obvious.
So the best descriptor I've heard of The Last of Us was from Noah Caldwell-Gervais, where he said that it was basically an attempt at an HBO prestige drama retrofitted onto a generic gameplay model, and in this case, Resident Evil 4. And I think that's a pretty accurate description.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you think that's maybe why the show itself is kind of catching fire?
Oh yeah,
the show
took it 1-to-1. They just cut out the gameplay elements, and you know they have room to change stuff if they want to, but other than that, they can just directly translate it to the screen. It's done.
It's literally just like editing out the boring parts where you have to control a guy.
Walking around looking for a broken bottle or whatever.
Yeah. I thought I love that show. I really enjoyed that first season, but one thing I wish they had done one scene with just implausible bunches of waist high cover for just like one action sequence, just to wink at the audience. I know it's not a show where winking at the audience really makes sense, but
I like.
I was holding
stuff,
out hope
though,
for that.
in video game movies. Like I remember the Doom movie, the one with the Rock and everything. There was like a scene where he had to go find a key card or something, and I was like, yeah,
Yeah, they get it.
Yeah,
it's interesting because that sounds great to me too, but the exact same thing in comic book movies and stuff always makes me angry. Like in that Luke Cage show, when at one moment they have the guy get into a full Power Man costume with the like yellow shirt and he looks fantastic, and then he sees himself in the mirror and basically like looks at the camera and says, "Comic books are for losers," because you shouldn't wear a cool, colorful costume. Everything should just be gritty. That stuff bothers me, but I like it for some reason with video games.
Flipping around, I do maybe see this as the one where I think that Naughty Dog needs to be a little more careful than maybe they think they do. I know they're like almost designed to win like Game of the Year, Critic Awards, stuff like that, but I don't know. There's something about this one I can't put my finger on. It just doesn't. I don't know. It left me really, really, really cold from that trailer. So I guess we'll see what's happening with it. That's one I want to see gameplay for sure from. I mean, all of these I do, of course, but
yeah, I just don't think I can even judge it until I see gameplay. Like, I have zero interest until they tell me what to actually do in this game. LittleMac,
the thread. Oh, go ahead.
So go ahead, Kappa. You were saying something.
I asked in the thread, but coming back around to that, there's almost no gameplay shown in any of these trailers, right? It was just trailers, not.
Yeah, you saw we saw a little bit of gameplay actually in one that I wanted to mention, which was the new RGG game, Project Century. Mm-hmm. So they showed a little bit of the brawler combat that you'd be doing. It looks a little more visceral and brutal than your typical RGG combat, which is mostly fisticuffs. Here, you have a knife. You can go stabby on people, which is always great.
So being really generous, was this 2026 games that you think we mostly saw here? Or further out, or what was your take on the timeline on what we were seeing?
Late next year. Well, we're recording this in 2024. It'll come out in 2025. So late 2025 to mid 2026 would be where I think a lot of these are going to land. Project Center, I think, is probably mid 2026. And I'm actually really excited to play a game that's set in like early 20th century Japan, as opposed to like medieval Japan or like Renaissance Japan, like Meiji era, or like modern Japan. Let's do something else. So I'm excited for that. LittleMac, you mentioned you had an announcement you want to. I suppose I would be remiss as the guy who spends way too much of his time playing ancient games if I didn't say that the Ninja Gaiden Ragebound.
Oh yeah.
That they announced.
2D side scroller.
Yeah, they're making a new 2D side scroller. I am cautiously optimistic about that because there have been a lot of good like revive classic 2D series with some 2D gameplay experiences in recent years. So I could certainly imagine it being good in that regard. And I think you could do some like the cinematics in the NES games or the Famicom games are really cool in their own right. So if you brought that same level of style to obviously having a lot more technology to do the cinematics, I think that could be cool. I'm not a fan of this Ragebound subtitle.
Yeah, that makes it a weird one.
It's like it kind of boring sounding. It makes it sound like, oh no, it's all going to be about Ryu Hayabusa's like trauma. That is like why like something I don't know. If you compare it to,
it's going to be difficult.
Probably,
I would bet on it. But probably not in the way that the old Ninja Gaiden games sometimes are, where there's a bird spawning at some very specific point and you kill it, but you're still standing right on the spawn point, so it spawns again. You can't make that jump because the bird just keeps coming.
What's the boss we always talk about, Merve, when it comes to Ninja Gaiden? The one like none of us ever beat. It was like the boss of Act 2. He has a dumb name.
I don't know anything about Ninja Gaiden.
Okay, well,
I'm sorry.
We talked about this before. I was like, there's a boss that I don't think a normal human could beat. I think he was like really early in the game on the NES one, and that game was brutal. as a kid playing it. So yeah, I
Those
don't know.
Those are hard games.
Yeah, yeah.
For sure. So, both in a mix of like well-designed hard and some of the things like enemy spawn points. If they're right on the edge of the screen, that enemy's
Yep.
just going to keep respawning endlessly.
Yeah.
Those little annoying things. But yeah, this
Even the
Rage
3D
Bound is a
reboot they
subtitle.
did was super hard, wasn't it?
That's what I've heard. I've never touched those.
Me neither, because I heard it was so hard.
Yeah. But if you look at here's the subtitles of the second and third NES game to compare to Ragebound: The Dark Sword of Chaos and The Ancient Ship of Doom. It's like, come on, give us a cool, like, dramatic,
Ragebound
everything doesn't have
sounds,
to be
like, out of
serious in a
control.
boat.
Like, you could be a Viking berserker in Ragebound, but ninjas, you want them to be like cool and stealthy, you know?
Yeah, and like literally, you could we could make any hero can be Ragebound. It could be like a shooting game, Contra, Ragebound. They're really angry at the aliens that have invaded the Earth. It's generic. Have a little fun. But I'm cautiously optimistic for the game.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like they play a little safe with the titles and just get wacky with it. I mean, maybe you'll
intergalactic, not intergalactic.
The Heretic Prophet.
Heretics, yeah. Not that.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. Sometimes you'll miss, like with Intergalactic.
Get wacky, but not with the exact spirit of like an edgy 14-year-old in 1995.
The other two announcements I want to mention were Thick as Thieves, which is the multiplayer immersive sim by Warren Spector's studio. I am very skeptical of this. I actually listened to an interview with Warren Spector on the podcast Dropped Frames after the Game Awards, and it reassured me a little bit that this wasn't a ridiculous idea, but I still don't think it's going to entirely come together. So we'll have to see how that goes. And finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Shadow Labyrinth, the Pac-Man Metroidvania.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why not?
That one, the trailer did not look very amazing. The short that they did for that Amazon series was weird in a good way, but I don't know how much to expect from the game.
I agree. That short was like one of those things you're like, huh. That's the reaction I had to it. Huh, that was kind of cool. But like I did not think I need to play in this world for hours. There was, that was kind of an odd one to come out of nowhere. I remember, man, it must have been 15 years ago. I remember there was like a popular T-shirt that was like an astronaut, that was like skull and bones and like ghosts around them, and it was like, this was Pac-Man, or it's like an edgy Pac-Man or something like that. But I don't know. Sure, whatever. I'm sure it'll at least be interesting, is what I'm guessing.
I think it's just so absurd that it loops back around to being interesting again. Like, normally something's super edgy and intentionally so. I'm just like, okay, this is corny. Mm-hmm. But this is so self-assured in its edginess that I'm like, you know what? I dig what you're doing. I'm curious to see what comes out of this. So,
yeah, I would definitely say curious. Like, there's a real eye-rolling quality to being told that we're doing edgy Pac-Man now.
Edgy.
But it is kind of like you said, like you roll your eyes so hard that they come all the way back around, and you're looking at it again, and you're like, maybe that will be interesting.
That 360 eyeball rotation.
Yeah.
Definitely going on. I do find it very funny that we're talking about edgy Pac-Man when he's like the character with no edges because he's a circle.
Beyond the edge, yeah.
Beyond the edge. Infinite edge. So that was the Game Awards.
One other one I want to bring up real quick, because we did get some gameplay. That was the Outer Worlds 2.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Which, I didn't love the Outer Worlds. The trailers for the sequel look good. I just hope they understand that the leveling system in the first game was kind of crappy.
It was. You're right. Yeah, I agree.
Boring.
I think everyone agrees that. I think even in the trailer they made like kind of jokes of like, yeah, the last one was not ready and kind of got pushed out like way before it needed to be. So I think they kind of recognize that, but this one I think probably ready for prime time. It looks like they got a little bit more work into it. At least the environments look gorgeous in that. So, but yeah, the combat itself terrible, I thought, and the leveling really bad.
Yeah, the leveling was just dull. It had too many combat encounters with too little variety of enemies.
Yeah,
Um,
everything.
I just don't know if
revolved
they
around the same-
understand if that was the. I just don't know if they understand that that was an issue.
Yeah, it's hard to tell sometimes with that studio, right? Like, I think they know what good combat is. I just don't know if they've ever been able to pull it off, right? I'm trying to think of any game that Obsidian did where I was like, oh, this combat is great. That wasn't already Fallout New Vegas and kind of already in their, framework of that. Because even Alpha
Well,
Protocol was rough when it came to
well, the
combat.
combat doesn't have to be great if you're making fun choices when you level up, and that translates to, being stronger in combat. But the guns were boring, the perks were boring, everything was just. It didn't have anything to elevate it.
Yeah. Oh, a lot of these, so many of these are gotta wait and see. I think mode, but yeah, that one, I'll give Outer Worlds as many shots as they want because I really like the atmosphere of the game world. Everything was fun. The characters were cool. I love the companions. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it needs a little bit more time to cook.
Yeah, and hopefully they'll get it. I think they have a little more leeway now that they're not an independent studio. So they've got slightly bigger budgets for pulling this kind of stuff off. The first Outer Worlds was really made on a shoestring budget, and I think now they can. I don't think they want to expand the scope too much. I think they've got the right size of RPG, but maybe they can polish it a little better for
because
the next release.
They were a studio that was in kind of like funding hell for a long time. Like crowdfunding was how they were getting games out, and I mean it wasn't like the kind of crowdfunding where it's like we've got tons of money and we're going to just use this as like a pre-order. It was like, no, like we need this money to make this game or it's not going to happen. So
that's how they did Pillars, and I believe Tyranny as well was crowdfunded.
Yeah.
I don't think Tyranny was crowdfunded. That was published by Paradox. And I think the reason we never got a sequel is because Paradox doesn't know what they're doing with RPGs.
That's really actually like
it's not one of their 4X. So
that is like one of the stories of this year, that Paradox has basically kind of collapsed in on itself, and has I mean, they've mismanaged studios. Like it was Harebrained, I believe, that they mismanaged real badly. Things are not going well over there, and there's that whole controversy with the new Vampire Masquerade game. Like they took Hardsuit Labs off of it. I believe the Chinese room is on it now.
So hopefully that'll come out good, but like it doesn't look like a sequel to Bloodlines. What they originally put out did look like a sequel to Bloodlines. I would love to know what was so bad that made them throw it out, because what we saw at first was what I wanted, and what they're showing now might be good, but isn't what I was promised and isn't really what I wanted.
Yeah, maybe that the vertical slice looked good, but all the progress and everything else was not enough.
Yeah, it could definitely be that it really was bad, but who knows? We'll never know.
There was another couple ones when Paradox was like kind of just like, you got to get these games out when they weren't ready. I think Lamplighters League was one of them. That was when Harebrained was like, we're done. Like you guys are forcing us to meet deadlines we wouldn't meet normally. So and Harebrained is a smaller size studio, I think. So that was kind of surprising. But I think Paradox has been under the gun for a while for just kind of really terrible management.
That's actually a good segue into our next topic, which is studio closures, which is probably, I would say, the biggest news story of the year in the games industry. Last year, we talked about layoffs at studios, and those have continued apace in 2024. But now entire studios are shutting down too. We've already talked about some of them on the podcast previously. There was Firewalk, the makers of Concord. They were shut down by Sony earlier this year. Prytania Media shut down most of their studios. That was run by Jeff and Annie Strain. Microsoft shut down AlphaDog, Arcane Austin, and Tango Gameworks, the last of which was eventually rescued by Krafton, of all companies. There are three that I wanted to highlight, and we can talk about others, but I think these are kind of emblematic of the kinds of closures that there have been this year. The first is Oka Studio, which made and released Visions of Mana this year, and then was shut down pretty much immediately at the tail end of August. And that shutdown was not based on the success or failure of Visions of Mana. Like, the game came out and the studio was instantly shut down like it was always planned. And that's because NetEase wanted to just cut its Japanese investments. So they were like, well, we're shutting you down. Then there's Humanoid Origin in November. That was Casey Hudson of BioWare fame's new studio. They're working on a new sci-fi AAA game. And before they could even unveil what they were working on, they just couldn't secure enough funding to continue, so they shut down. And then the third type of shutdown is like a genuine, you released a game and it was a financial failure kind of shutdown. That was Ubisoft San Francisco and Ubisoft Osaka, who worked on X Defiant, which released to some success, but then the audience dwindled and it never really found a consistent audience. So Ubisoft pulled the plug this year, shut down their San Francisco and Osaka studios, and is essentially chopping their Sydney studio in half. So those are the kinds of things we're seeing. We're seeing studios release games and they don't find an audience to get shut down. Studios do their contracted work and then get shut down because of the parent company's other needs. And studios that shut down after never really getting off the ground.
Yeah. This feels cyclical to me. It feels like we were here not maybe 15, 20 years ago before kind of like the first, everybody who could get bought out got bought out, kind of in that like mid 2000s time frame. It seems like there's always this like kind of like give and take, right? Like if you're an independent studio and one flop shuts down the studio, is that worth believing in versus being beholden to a publisher who's going to give you the money and let you get your game out the door, but you're going to have to make a ton of compromises to do it, right? Yeah. I don't think, I don't want to say like some studios deserve to be shut down, but there are poorly managed studios. I mean, there just are, right? Like everything that kind of was coming out from Firewalk sounded like it was a disaster there. That game cost $400 million. It's, at some point you do have to hold some of the studios accountable. It absolutely, I mean, I'm not saying, the individual people that, worked on it, but yeah, I mean, I
think what should be done in that case is replace studio leadership with people who know how to manage a studio. And then hopefully the rank and file can keep their jobs.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what should have been done at Firewalk a lot earlier before they put out Concord in the state it came out in. And you should see this at other studios like Arcane Austin probably should have had its leadership replaced because they did not manage that project well. You see it also at Bungie with Pete Parsons, whom they can't replace for legal reasons, and he's just essentially burning the studio down.
Yeah.
So was that Skeletons?
I was saying Bungie just collapsed this year from, 10 years of the management just sort of being obstinate, not wanting to cut anything on their end, and now Destiny 2 is just withered up and blown away.
Yeah.
So, do you think that like maybe the future would be look something a little bit maybe like Bungie or other things where it's like, so the studios are all owned, managed, however you want to kind of talk, by publishers, right? And you set up a studio, it makes this game. If it doesn't work, you kind of dissolve the studio, but absorb them back into the corporate world of Sony Interactive, right? So all those Concord people, they do keep their jobs, but you shut down Firewalk and distribute, the sound guys and the coding guys out throughout, the rest of Sony. It's obviously upheaval for them. I get it, but would keeping their jobs out, would that be the better option, you think?
I think that's the second best option. I think the best option is they keep their existing jobs and you fire incompetent leadership. Mm-hmm. I think the second best option is what happened, say, with parts of Bungie this year, where they got absorbed into Sony proper, or with Roundhouse Studios, which was another studio that Microsoft shuttered, but instead of getting rid of the studio, they just distributed them into another part of like Microsoft Gaming or Xbox. So I think that's probably the best way forward,
Yeah.
or it's the second best way forward. Like whatever helps people keep their jobs is what I think is the way to go. But
That's kind of what I've been thinking about, like the structure, right? Like, what is the structure? What would you prefer? Would you have the safety of a big studio, or the independence to make what you want? Is kind of a tough toss up to think about if you're like a creative person who thinks that what you're making is very important, but you want your job also to be a little more secure.
I mean, if people want that independence, like once capital is more easily available, they can strike out on their own. I'm like, my primary concern is always going to be with like the devs who work on these games, with labor being able to continue to stay gainfully and meaningfully employed.
So like in Bungie's case, they don't take the $4 billion from Sony. I don't see that ever happening, but let's just say they don't take it, right? They stay independent, but then Destiny continues to bleed money, apparently, right?
Oh, Destiny should have, like, Bungie was right to go get bought up.
Right. Okay.
And I think Sony inked a bad deal with them, and they should have made Bungie give up more of their independence.
Right.
Like, what's happening now is the result of Sony like not being able to get rid of Pete Parsons.
I think Bungie's story is they have a history of kind of I don't know how, charisma or just easiness, I don't know, making these deals that are weirdly advantageous for them, and they've been able to kind of skim along that in a way that they keep rolling. So from the outside looking in, you think, oh, they must be doing something right. When really they've just been kind of lucking out with these deals, and they finally got to Sony, and I guess Sony's lawyers or something happened with Sony where they just put up some walls that Bungie couldn't work around. Yeah. I think that's fundamentally what happened there.
Well, I think Bungie the studio, but I think Pete Parsons himself is
the leadership
ridiculously unsafe. Yeah, so it's almost the opposite of what Merve would prefer. It's like
Can we talk about a studio that has kind of dodged the worst case scenarios this past year? That I think might be a good example of what maybe we could hope for as best case scenarios. Creative Assembly, British studio. Their most famous games by far are the Total War franchise. They are currently owned by Sega, and someone, I don't know if it was Sega, I don't know if it was Creative Assembly, decided they wanted to do a hero shooter, an extraction shooter. Hyenas. And Sega funded, like, what was it, $500 million, something.
It was a lot of money.
Insane into it. And everything you would read about it was just terrible. It was basically Sega propaganda, where all the teams would be competing to steal Sega-themed items. And there was even a character who was a Sonic the Hedgehog cosplayer. Now, all of this is sounding awful. That's not an exaggeration. That's not a joke. That is a real thing.
I'm laughing because it's so ridiculous, but
God.
And so it was received so badly in playtesting that they canceled it a week before it was going to release, which I have just never heard of before. That is grim.
Yeah, one of the funniest things
at that point, just put it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's
it's a live service. It would cost so much to run it compared to the revenue they'd make.
Oh yeah, it was
I missed that detail.
Okay. Every trend they could have been chasing, that they were, but they had the Total War Warhammer game going, which has been far more profitable for them than they ever expected in terms of the DLC. They've been working on that for essentially a decade, and they had their another studio, a subsidiary, Creative Assembly, Sophia, which had made Troy, as kind of a spin-off Total War, and then Pharaoh, which didn't do amazingly well, but they essentially brought in Sophia. They put them to work working on DLC for Total Warhammer because that's where the money was. I think they did have some layoffs, but it was all people involved with Hyenas. They got rid of one of the VPs who had kind of pissed off the Total War Reddit. And they basically just started giving out Christmas gifts to the Total War community because that was the only thing they had left that was making money. They've hired back the person who headed up Alien Isolation to make an Alien Isolation sequel, and it's basically, from a consumer perspective, it's everything you could possibly want.
And they caught a ton of fire for some of the pricing on their DLC, and they were able to say, "Look, we were wrong. We're not going to do this. We're going to go back. We're going to make it right." And they did. So, they've been listening to the fans as well. Yeah.
And as far as I can tell, it seems to have staunched the bleeding. And the price for doing this is they have to make the relatively niche strategy games that I guess they felt they were trying to get away from, instead of, gambling away everyone's jobs chasing fads.
Yeah.
That's just seems like sound business to me, and it's sad that it had to be so much money wasted to get there. But it's better than just sort of firing everyone, I think.
Yeah, I'm looking at what they used to work on like way back in the day. And they did Stunt Car Racer, they did FIFA International Soccer.
Yeah.
And they did a series of Aussie rule football games. So they used to do a bunch of different stuff before they settled on strategy. Basically around the turn of the millennium is when they went full strategy, basically constantly until Alien Isolation.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I think it's probably nice that they do want to branch out, but you also have to pay the bills at the end of the day. And if these strategy games are popular, people still like them, and they can still do a good job making them. You pay the bills with the stuff that will pay the bills.
Yeah. And then you take chances when you can. Yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of these developers are having a hard time sort of admitting to themselves. Like we saw that with Concord. They had the one game that was this super ambitious, multi-million-dollar thing that had to sell millions of copies and have a huge ongoing player base to succeed. And of course it wasn't. Anyone who was watching, who saw any trailers for it, knew that wasn't going to be the case. But they put all the eggs in that basket anyway. I don't know why. I don't know who told them that was a good idea, but you got to have something a little bit more sensible going on, even if you think it's too niche or not popular or just too dorky for your tastes.
And all the reports coming out of the studio seem to be like this toxic positivity, where if anybody even said this doesn't really make sense, this game isn't working, they were kind of banished to the Shadow Realm because of pointing out the flaws in the golden goose, kind of.
Yeah, I mean, if all your eggs are in that one basket, criticizing the basket is equivalent to criticizing the studio.
Yeah.
So I get where they're coming from on that, even as I think that it was probably the wrong approach for them to take.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So, yeah, a lot of studio closures. Sad times.
But like you said,
it is really.
So I remember when Bethesda bought Fallout for a song, because Interplay was basically just selling whatever they could to keep someone's lights on. I probably one guy at that point. And now Bethesda makes huge profits off of Fallout, and we're never going to run out of Fallout again.
Yeah,
so,
they got a TV show now. That's
It'd be nice if we could get another one that's as good as New Vegas, or at least better than Fallout 4. But we got lots of Fallout.
Yeah, you were mentioning Fallout. That was owned by Interplay previously, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, I thought they were defunct. Apparently, they still exist. I did not know that. Now they own. Sorry, go ahead.
Define exist.
I mean, the company is still operational. I don't know what they really own anymore, though.
What are they maybe like set up to do like remasters or something?
Yeah, like old IP that they're licensing out at this point.
Yeah.
But I don't even know what IP they still own, because they sold Fallout to Bethesda, which is now under Microsoft's umbrella. So.
Yeah, I mean, like Microprose is still putting out games. Like sometimes some of those old studios, they just have enough juice to keep going, but a lot of times it's just they're doing reissues.
Yeah, Like, at this point, who knows? Who knows, like, what these games, what these companies even do? They find some way to make money off, like, residuals or royalties or something, and they can stay afloat with, like, a skeleton crew of 10 people managing IP.
Yeah, like 8 of them are lawyers. Yeah, exactly. So.
Yeah. Well, that was the year that was in gaming news. We're now going to throw it on over to our community, who will give us some of their top 3 games of 2024. I think right now we just have one person. This might just be Third String Hero, but maybe it'll be more people by the time we assemble this podcast. So stay tuned, and when we get back, you'll hear from us on our favorite, least favorite, and most surprising games of 2024.
Hello there, friends. Third String Hero coming at you with only the greatest gaming takes and opinions. Coming into 2024, it was clear that it was going to be a big year for JRPGs. Trails, Mana, Yakuza, Rebirth, Reload, ReFantazio, Relink, noticing a theme here. Now, of course, I was very excited as a JRPG fan and a big fan of at least a few of those series that I mentioned above. Here's the problem. This year sucked. It sucked bad. And I did what I could just to play whatever was giving me joy at that very moment. I got sucked into strategy and 4X games because I just had to have my brain solving infrastructure problems rather than story ones. So my list looks a lot different than I thought it would going into the year, but that's okay. I did still do some bigger RPG gaming in the form of a complete run of Baldur's Gate 3, as well as playing through some of the Dragon Age games. I'm hoping to be refreshed in 2025 in what looks like a very busy year for some of my favorite series, plus some catching up to do. With that being said, let's get into the top 3. Number 3 is Metaphor ReFantazio. This would likely be my number 1 if I had finished it. I'm about a third through at the moment, and just lost some momentum, and haven't gotten back. Not because of anything the game did wrong necessarily, it's just that life took me in a different direction for a bit. What I have played is great, and I'm really looking forward to having more to say about it as I make it further and finish it. Number 2 is Unicorn Overlord. This is the only 2024 game that I had played by June of this year. It's a great effort from Vanillaware with a very cool system. I even like the much maligned story because sure, it's something very simple, but it's told well, and they don't try to make it anything that it's not. I think by the end, if you are really power gaming like I tend to, you will break the game a good bit in terms of balance, but that's been true of every tactics game that I've ever played, so it's hard for me to hold that against it. Overall, very pretty and very good. Big fan. And number 1 game of the year this year for me is Trails Through Daybreak. Yeah, big shocker here. Genuinely, though, this is a massive breath of fresh air for the Trails series after the Cold Steel era seemed to overstay its welcome. This has a great new cast, a noticeable shift in tone and story, and just some really new life in the series. Supposedly, the next game, which is coming out next year, is the worst in the entire franchise. I can't wait. And that's it. That is my top 3. I did not get to a lot this year, but I leave you all with the usual well wishes. Wherever you are listening, may you have a great 2025 in gaming and in life. Be kind to yourselves and others, lead with empathy and compassion. For what I believe is the 3rd year in a row, I want to also say that I wish the best for all of the laid-off workers and staff in the games industry, and that I hope everyone lands on their feet as the ravages of capitalism continue on. Good luck, much love to everyone listening, and I'll see you all next year.
Hello, Avocado GamesCast. This is Jarathen, and while I didn't get to play everything I wanted to this year, the curse of being an RPG fan, I did finish 2024 very happy with my top 3. At number 3, I have Unicorn Overlord. Vanillaware's most recent game before this, 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim, is one of my absolute favorite games, so I was down for this on release, even going so far as to secure the $130 Monarch Edition, complete with a card game no one wants to learn or play. But whereas 13 Sentinels was a mind-bending, multiple point-of-view narrative with a simplistic tower defense game attached to it, Unicorn Overlord swaps that, instead being a mind-bending tactical strategy game with a simplistic RPG story attached to it. It could have been an overwhelming mess, or worse, a slog, but Vanillaware are old hands at this by now, and the complexity and difficulty both ramp up nice and smooth, with occasional checks to make sure players aren't just setting and forgetting their strategies as they go, which would have made the game far too passive. It looks great, it sounds great, and there are many different ways to build your teams and their synergies. Number 2 is kind of a cheat, since it's actually a complete edition of a 2023 release, but this is the only version I've played, and I thought it was really, really good. So Slay the Princess the Pristine Cut is my runner-up for Game of the Year. The game's hook, that the player is told by a narrator their job is to slay the princess, or the world will end, is kind of the whole game, and it just works. It's one of those best-to-go-in blind games, so I won't dig in too much, except to say the art is visceral and evocative, the music is excellent, and the voice performances are pitch perfect. One of the best narrative adventures I've ever played. Maybe the best. It makes you think, and it makes you feel. And my Game of the Year for 2024 is the obvious one. It's not often I find myself nodding in complete agreement with the general consensus, but Astrobot is just too danged good to be denied. It builds on the platforming genre's foundations to reach a new apex, causing many others in the same space to look like pale imitations, half-hearted efforts empty of life or purpose. Astrobot is a joyful toy in virtual form, not only a striking argument for what modern controllers can actually be and do, but also a reminder that the genre itself, old as the hills at this point, still has plenty of life in it, given the right team. If you told me a year ago that one of the highlights of gaming this year would be endlessly frolicking in piles of apples or gems or sprinkles, I would not have believed you. And yet here we are. Thanks for keeping up the great work that is the Avocado Gamescast, and here's to a happy 2025 that will mark the end, finally, of Switch 2 rumors, and the start of Switch 2 Pro rumors instead.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the Avocado Gamescast Year-End Extravaganza 2024. You just heard from our community on their top 3 games of 2024, and now we're going to talk about our favorite games of 2024. So what we're going to do is we're first going to go around and give all our honorable mentions. If you got a top 10, it'll be your number 10 through number 6, and then we're going to do a round table of our top 5 games, where we're kind of going to go one by one, and if someone else has a game higher up on their list, then we'll table that discussion until we get to that position on their list. So let's start with our honorable mentions, and I will just briefly run mine down, and then
Sure.
We'll go LittleMac, Drinking with Skeletons, and the Kappa. So, real quick, my number 10 game of the year, MEO the Smiling Man Famicom Detective Club. It's a successful revival of the decades-old Famicom Detective Club visual novel mystery series, and it has one of the boldest, most audacious narratives of 2024. And it's an endlessly clever, surprising puzzle platformer Metroidvania with this really singular neon kind of retro VCR kind of aesthetic. It looks super cool. At number 8, Individualism in the Dead Internet Age, an anti-big tech asset flip shovelware manifesto. This is a free interactive essay by Natalie Lawhead, you might know them as Alien Melon, about capitalism and the homogenization of online culture. At number 7, I Am Your Beast, a pulse-pounding, highly satisfying parkour FPS with bite-sized levels. It's exactly the kind of score-chasing FPS that really gets my lizard gamer brain going. And at number 6, 20 Small Mazes. It's exactly what it says on the tin. It is 20 small mazes. Each maze is like this clever little marvel. They're all do these different kinds of mazes with various kinds of gimmicks and mechanics. And it's also completely free for you to download off Steam or itch.io. All right, LittleMac, what are your honorable mentions?
All right, so in classic LittleMac form, I did not play enough new games in 2024 to do honorable mentions. This is something I got to think about doing better at this next year, because I'm turning 40, and I feel like disengaging from current popular culture is one of the things that makes you actually old in a way that the numbers don't. But this year I didn't get there. Yeah.
All right. Skeletons, what about your honorable mentions?
In no particular order for the honorable mentions, Space Marine 2 was a surprisingly big improvement on the original game in most ways. Just kind of a fun tech showpiece with the huge swarm of Tyranids, and if you like, punching things in Space Marine, it's tons of fun. All around solid, kind of an old-fashioned game. Zephon, a 4X game from I think Slytherin Studios. If anyone ever played Gladius: Relics of War, it's essentially just that, but no longer Warhammer 40k themed. Almost a weird sci-fi dystopian war combat focused 4X with storytelling that's a little bit reminiscent of the old Alpha Centauri game. I think it's worth a look for anyone who likes 4X titles. And then Solium Infernum, which was essentially a remake of an old digital board game that was made in actually Adobe Reader, I believe, something crazy like that, where you play a prince of hell vying for the throne after Satan disappears. The Avocado, we've had a bunch of games this year because you can play it asynchronously, and it's a very good game with great production values, despite being a little indie game. And another one where they put out the game and it sold so poorly they had to shut down. And I think that kind of covers it for my honorable mentions.
All right, and Kappa, what about your honorable mentions?
Okay, I've got 5. Helldivers 2, just outside of my top 5. One of those, I think we could maybe talk more about that, but I think good launch, kind of some issues afterwards, here and there. Stalker 2, amazing they even got it out. A little flawed, but good overall. I've had a lot of frustrations with getting through certain areas. Kind of got probably about 2/3 through the game, I would guess, then kind of quit in frustration. Heard a lot of it's been fixed. May give it another go. V Rising, one of the few kind of like open world survivor builders from a top down. I kind of enjoyed mixing it with an ARPG. I think was a really smart choice. Kind of a cool vampire aesthetic going on. Dragon Age Veilguard, kind of right outside that number at the number 9 spot. Number 10, Lord of the Rings Return to Moria, another crafter that I really enjoyed. I think mostly for the setting and the age, but also had some fun stuff going on with it as a Lord of the Rings game.
All right, I think that's a pretty wide gamut of different honorable mentions. I looked up Zephon while you were talking, Skeletons, and that aesthetic is really striking. I love how detailed these maps look.
It's very good. It's got a little bit more of a sense of humor than it seems. It's because it's a very sort of grim, dark, post-apocalyptic thing. But then, when you actually kind of see some of the units, like there's a hero for the generic humans, if you kind of go down that path, who is basically just like an '80s action hero with machine guns on his shoulders.
That's amazing.
Or if you go with the more cyborg side of things, they have a hero who she's like a femme fatale Russian, and when she gets hit, she bends her whole spine backwards at 90-degree angles and then snaps back. So there's little touches that make you realize that they're taking it seriously enough, but not so seriously as to throttle the fun.
That sounds almost like Red Alerty,
yeah,
kind of campy, but also serious at the same time.
Yeah,
but not
quite that campy.
You can be fun in the cutscenes, and then you have to have the gameplay to back it up, though. But I think that's one thing that Red Alert really nails.
Okay, so nothing like Tim Curry yelling about going to space.
No, not quite that. Although there are dinosaurs made out of battleships.
That's incredible. Okay, I think I should get this. I really need to get back into strategy, so maybe this is my way in. So now we're going to do our roundtable of our top 5s, and I guess I'll start with my top 5. Disclaimer before we get into the rest of this, I still haven't finished Metaphor ReFantazio or Dragon Age the Veilguard, so I haven't considered them for this list. And there's every chance in the world that Metaphor would have made my top 5. But sorry, I'm only 25 hours in, so not getting on here. I love how I'm saying only 25 hours. Yeah. Most games are much shorter than 25 hours long. But that's like not even a third of that game. So, at number 5, I have Echo Point Nova. Does anyone else have that on their list?
No.
All right, let's talk about Echo Point Nova. This is an open world first person shooter with optional co-op that's set in an archipelago of like sky islands with these floating research and mining facilities. So you're like running around amongst the clouds on these islands. There's a huge focus on parkour and movement. It's like essentially Titanfall 2 in the sky with even more crazy movement mechanics. You have like a hoverboard, you can grind up walls, you've got a grappling hook, you've got a triple jump, you get even more abilities later on. It's like extremely fucking sick. Every moment of this game is like making you say, oh my god, this whips ass. And it's really like an FPS, aficionado's FPS. This is not a game with hit scan weapons. You see the bullets because they're moving slow enough for you to like see them. For certain weapons, you can even dodge the bullets if you know what you're doing. There's a whole array of different weapons for each category. So the stats on those weapons determine your play style. This is a game with multiple different types of grenades. You've got your frag grenades. You've got like your repulsion grenades that launch people into the sky, and you can also use as like little vortices that'll allow you to gain height. There's also like freeze grenades, which you can use to freeze enemies in place, but that also make the surface slippery, so you can use that to like get a speed boost. You also have like melee options. So there's basically every tool available at your disposal, and it's up to you to use those tools in these and chain them together with the movement mechanics in really creative and interesting and varied ways. Really, really fun thing developed by a very small studio. And I think everyone who likes first-person shooters should give this a go.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I pulled up the trailer while you were talking on Steam, and that does look really cool.
Oh, it is so much fun. Like if there's one downside, it's a little bit repetitive because there's like no story to this. This is very much like whatever thin narrative is there is just an excuse to get you from point A to point B. But it's so much fun to get from point A to point B and then fight the enemies at point B that you don't even care if there's no story. LittleMac, what's your number 5?
So I will tag in round 4 because I didn't get to 5. Yeah.
All right, Skeletons, what's your number 5?
My number 5 is the Dragon Quest III HD 2D remake. Is that on anyone else's list?
Yes.
Oh, it is.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's on my list.
Okay. All right, so we're
talk about
tabling
that.
that until we
Wouldn't
get
you know,
to...
one of my top 4 games of 2024 is an old game from the ancient past.
Oh, it was new to me.
All right, Kappa, what's your number 5?
Indiana Jones and the
Great Circle?
Oh, yeah. So I cheat, as you know. To me, I'm probably like 85% done with this game. I'm in the last area. This game, I think, is going to be something that is going to miss a lot of year-end lists because of when it came out, and is not going to make it around for the next one. But I am loving it. It's so much fun. I love just hitting people in the head with stuff, which is not very Indiana Jones, but the rest is. The exploration is great. Everything feels so natural. Looks gorgeous on Xbox. This is like one of those things where like every year, there's like what justifies Game Pass. That's been this game for me this year.
So I think we talked about this on the podcast before, but what struck me about this game is that they marketed it really weirdly.
Yeah.
They marketed it like a first-person Uncharted, when in actuality it's more like a Dishonored or a Hitman.
Yeah.
Like it's a quasi immersive sim.
It does something very cool where it kind of like portrays the level to you as what you want to do, but then it lets you loose. And that's what I'm really enjoying about it. I don't feel like I'm confined to playing it one way or another. I hate autofail stealth. It's maybe, I think, one of the worst game design things in the world, right? Let me go stealth, but then if I don't need to stealth, let me play the game and get myself potentially out of trouble. So this definitely does that. It's got a feel of, it feels like Indiana Jones because he tries to be stealthy, but if it screws up, then he's got to improvise, and that's what this game kind of really feels like. The feeling of Indiana Jones, like the movie, this game absolutely nails. Yeah.
I have to know, do they ever make the joke about I'm selling these fine leather jackets?
What's that?
Do they ever make the joke about selling these fine leather jackets from the old LucasArts games?
No. Look, there's some callbacks, but honestly, it feels like it wants to be a game where if you've never seen the movies, you don't feel like you're lost in it. I would say if somehow you're a person who's avoided Indiana Jones and are playing an Indiana Jones game, you wouldn't miss much in this game. The bad guys are Nazis. You get it right away, right? The stuff that you're doing and sneaking around, it always gives you a reason. The characters are real clear. The bad guys are clearly bad guys. The open world puzzles are fantastic, but yeah.
I love how, like, in the dialogue subtitles, it'll be like fascist number one,
fascist.
talk to fascist number two.
It doesn't miss words. It tells you exactly what they are. Yeah. It's a gorgeous game too. I'm playing it on my Xbox, and it's one of those like, wow, okay, I get it. Really, 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 really cool game. If you've got I wouldn't even say patience, but if you want to just like take your time around the maps, and this is a game I think everybody's got those like, you should never ever look at this with a walkthrough. That's what I would say, right? This is when you want to just kind of plunder your way through. Great game. I haven't finished it yet, or otherwise I could see this kind of inching up my number one. I kind of hedge my bets, but if 80% of the game is this good, I feel comfortable putting it at number 5.
Yeah, I'm really excited to play it. I didn't have time this year, but I'm really excited to give it a go next year. Like I said, I didn't prioritize it or set aside time for it because it seemed like it was this highly linear, like Uncharted-esque experience. Mm-hmm. And now that I'm finding out that you have a lot of liberty, that it's really a more slow-paced, more thoughtful experience where you're like solving puzzles, you're observing guard routines, you're actually using your head a little bit.
Yeah.
Now I'm super pumped to play.
Yeah, and the thing about it that it balances that with is not punishing you if you fuck that part up. You know what I mean? It's not like, Uncharted could get really punishing if you fail a stealth section or something like that. Indiana Jones, I think, is a little more forgiving.
Yeah, I like the emphasis on improvisation because that's not something you see in a lot of immersive sims. Like, immersive sims are typically like you sit there, you plan out what you're going to do, and you go execute.
Yeah.
And here, maybe you can plan out what you're going to do, but you're going to need to come up with a contingency plan pretty quick when things go awry.
But doesn't that feel like Indiana Jones? Like, just if you were like
yeah.
kind of describe the, you know what I mean? Like, if you're
exactly.
Yeah, that's what I agree with.
And I think that's a really neat way to evolve the genre.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'm excited to give it a go when I get the chance. All right, my number 4 game, Children of the Sun. Does anyone else have that on their list?
No.
Nope.
All right. So, Children of the Sun, I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but in case you didn't listen to that episode, it's a puzzle shooter where you don't play as the shooter, you play as the bullet. So, here's the premise. You are a girl who has escaped from a cult, and you don't even have a name. You're literally just called the girl. And you are on a rampage killing all the members of the cult that abused you when you were growing up in it. So in each level, your goal is with one sniper bullet, you have to eliminate all the enemies. The wrinkle that makes this possible is that when you hit an enemy, you can redirect the bullet in any direction.
Ooh, okay.
And so the goal is to link together kills in one continuous chain. And if you fail to kill all the enemies in one continuous chain, then you have to, of course, redo the level. So this ends up creating some really clever puzzles, because sometimes, like, what you'll need to do is, instead of going from one enemy to another enemy, you hit an exploding barrel, and that also allows you to redirect your bullet. Or you go look up in the sky and you hit a passing bird, and then from up above you can hit an enemy down below. Things like that. And they add a few more mechanics as it goes that allow you to redirect bullets even without a hit. Then you can kind of shape the trajectory of bullets later. There are enemies that you need to hit multiple times later. They add more complications as it goes. What really makes this game super neat, though, is the aesthetic. It's got like this discordant, almost noise rock kind of soundtrack. And the aesthetic is, like, the visual aesthetic is this really unique, like, purple and gold, grimy, oily art style. It looks like, imagine like Killer 7 or Killer is Dead, but like set in Kentucky.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of a big switch there. Yeah.
Yeah. It's super neat. It's a lot of fun, extremely clever. Wish this game had sold more copies, because I think it was a flop for Devolver Digital. But I highly, highly recommend it. LittleMac, we could start now on your list. What's your number 4?
I have a number 4.
All
Would
right.
this be my number 4 had I played more games? I'm not sure. But if I have 4, number 4, a game I did like, is Princess Peach Showtime.
Wow, yeah.
Anyone else have that on their list?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Go ahead.
I only wound up acquiring this because it was released, I don't remember the exact date, but remarkably close to my birthday. And so my partner was asking me, what's a game I can get you? And I was like, well, the Princess Peach game is coming out just in time for my birthday. And so it wound up being one of the new games I played this year. And what I really enjoyed about it is that it has its own core gameplay, which is a little bit of a sort of light platforming brawler as Peach runs around. You know, there's a Z-axis. You can go up and down in addition to jumping to different levels. But it's mostly in a side-scrolling form. But then the core gimmick of the game is that every level is Peach is at a theater that has been taken over by bad guys with magic. And
the evil Grape
Yes.
the Witch.
Something like that. And so each level is one of these plays. The play thing is kind of weird. Like, they want you to believe it's a play, but they're all like movie genres, and like the sequels are playing like on higher floors in the same, which is like, that part makes no sense. But for each of these, say you get to be Cowboy Peach or Mermaid Peach, and within each of those, Peach putting on a costume and being a different character, they kind of merge in other video game genres. So like Ninja Peach has both stealth, like they're very light stealth, sneaking up on enemies, hitting them before they see you, avoiding moving spotlights and that kind of thing. And then at certain segments of the Ninja Peach levels, it becomes an endless runner, where Ninja Peach is dashing along with her arms behind her. And so kind of every level merges in like a primary video game genre and a secondary video game genre. And so it winds up like, it's super charming. It's pretty fun. It's not hard. As an adult, as a 39-year-old man, I didn't have any trouble with it really, except for some of the, I 100%ed it. So some of the little collectibles were a little tricky, but what I found it super charming the whole way through, and it was always tossing something new at me. And while I haven't had this opportunity yet, I finally got to introduce my nephews to video games in November. And I didn't have the game with me because I loaned it to my partner's niece, and I'm waiting to get it back. But one of my nephews loves princesses, and I feel like this is a perfect game for introducing a child to video games because it gives them a little taste of just, a whole lot of
Different
video
genres.
Yeah, you get a little bit of rhythm game. You get a little bit of like a detective mystery game that's not about action, that's about solving puzzles, and you get a little bit of sword fighting, and you get a little bit of endless running, and it's all just it's delightful, and it's constantly throwing something new at you. I really, really enjoyed it. Not sure that I would like unreservedly recommend it to an adult, but I would offer a qualified recommendation to an adult and an all-out recommendation to anyone who has like a kid who will play it with them.
What I really appreciate about this game, having played through it, was how good the animation was. Like, it's so expressive.
Yes.
Yeah, like it's something. It's like one of the things about this game that I most appreciated, that they could, like, they were able to give Peach so much personality when she's normally a character with very little personality, just by how they animated everything. So really,
yeah, she becomes Detective Peach, and she's moving like an old-timey Sherlock Holmes detective, or all that kind of. Yeah, it's beautifully done. It's very well put together.
Absolutely. Skeletons, what's your number 4?
My number 4 is the Elden Ring expansion, Shadow of the Erdtree. Is that on anyone else's list?
It would have been had I played it.
All right, let's talk about Shadow of the Erdtree.
So I debated whether or not should include this since it's an expansion rather than a new game. But, they charged $40 for it. It's probably of similar size to full games they've made before, like Bloodborne or Sekiro. Why not? Because I played through Elden Ring with 2 brand new characters this year through the expansion, multiple New Game Plus cycles, and I still want to go back and play Elden Ring more. It's great. It fundamentally is more Elden Ring. If you didn't like Elden Ring to start with, you're probably not going to like the expansion. If you did like Elden Ring, though, I think it is a very easy sell. It's not really as hard as FromSoft's DLCs usually are. Like the Old Hunters or the Dark Souls 3 DLCs. Those would kick your teeth in. That was kind of the point. With Shadow of the Erdtree, most of the difficulty just comes from this weird leveling system they introduced, that kind of where you are given huge handicaps until you find items scattered around. But as you pick them up, you very quickly will even out those numerical disadvantages, and then it's definitely not as hard as the late game of Elden Ring, which really just kind of lets it be fun in a way that I think a lot of expansions and DLC sometimes struggle to be. They're just fun boss fights, fun moments. There's the very famous now fight against Baal the Dragon, with the guy who's basically Ahab to Baal's Moby Dick, screaming, "Curse you, Baal!" And usually that, like, the super optional dragon would be a terribly difficult boss fight in the other FromSoft game. Baal is not that hard. He's just a big fun set piece, and you get to summon a dude who screams at him and throws spears, and it's a good time. And I think that just kind of sums up what made this a really standout expansion. It was just them being fun and clever and delivering more without just delivering the same, or even just cranking up the difficulty like they often do. So just a real quality expansion, one the likes of which I haven't seen in a long time.
I am a huge fan of From Software's expansions, going back right to like Dark Souls, Artorias of the Abyss, even the Dark Souls 2 trilogy of expansions that I don't think are as good, but are still pretty good. So it's gnawing at me that I haven't found the time yet to sit down and play Shadow of the Erdtree, but it sounds like I'm looking forward to it so much for pretty much everything you just said.
At the beginning, like, people were just having trouble not playing it, but having enough unlocked to play it. So I think they kind of fixed that up.
Yeah, well, you have to get pretty far into the optional content of base game to unlock it. And then you have to actually be willing to go find those collectible items to power yourself up enough.
Right.
And if you're not willing, like if you just keep banging your head against it and like, oh, I shouldn't have to do this, blah, 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 you're going to have a bad time. You just have to accept that they did this, whether you like it or not, and go hunt down some of these shards.
Yeah, I think like people kind of felt, I don't want to say entitled, but like, they'll say I paid $40 for this, I should be able to access it, but they're pretty clear about what you need to do to be able to access
I think that
DLC
was
before, like when they're selling it to you. So I don't know if that really washes. But yeah, I'm really glad that they were able to take what was a pretty generous and varied base game and add something new to it that felt a little bit fresh and different. And like that's the kind of expansion I like to see. Something that expands on the ideas of the base game, but does something a little fresh or different that would be hard to pull off in the base game. So, good on them for that.
Yeah.
All right. Kappa, what's your number 4?
My another cheat kind of. Well, I don't know. I think we can do remakes and remasters here. Age of Mythology Retold. So obviously,
does anyone else have that on their list? Guess not. All right, Kappa, go ahead.
Obviously, big RTS fan, right? Age of Mythology was one of my top ones in the first place. So remakes. I thought it was going to be mostly a graphic overhaul, but no, they actually went pretty far with this one, introducing entire pantheons basically to the game. So now that when you're having these battles, it's less about I get a cool unit because I chose Zeus. No, it's like Zeus is in there throwing lightning bolts, and they really went deep cut in some of the pantheons, down to like I think there's like Norse ones and everything in the game. So enjoyed my time playing it, and it kind of reminded me of a time when RTSs were a little slower, and that's not a knock. That's kind of like a good thing. I felt less like I was having to constantly micromanage every little thing that was going on. I'm able to expand and hold my bases and hold my own against pretty good AI, I would say. The resource management part of the game is still the same it's always been, but the actual battles where you're kind of like your main goal is to get mythology units countering mythology units, your regular units countering the regular units, and just hoping that your god powers kind of pull the difference if you're not hitting it. So remakes and remasters I think are kind of like they maybe like kind of like straddle a line of how much do you change without with you don't want to piss people off, but I think everybody kind of enjoyed this one, and even a lot of notes were like it's not just a straight up remaster. There's enough of a remake that if you enjoyed the game you're gonna like it. Ton of quality of life changes. They got an attack move. That's the one thing I noticed right away. Stuff like that is kind of what was making me a little bit more happy, I guess, about not having to bash my head against some of the older UI and AI things like that. But yeah, really enjoy the time I was spending with it. Slower is not a worst thing, maybe always with RTSs. And the god powers make the game feel really cool.
Yeah, I didn't think that they were sprucing it up that much. Like I thought it was just a simple graphical overhaul, but the fact that they've tweaked the mechanics a little bit is really nice to hear.
Yeah, and you feel it most in the bigger battles where it's later in the game and you're like, wow, they have way more horsemen than I thought they would, and then luckily your god can beam you down a little bit of help or something like that, and that's what having that tide turn because of the god you chose feels a little bit better, more like Age of Mythology, I guess, than Age of Empire. So but yeah, it got some really good reviews. I think it was pretty critically well received, and even back in the day, I remember Age of Mythology's AI being very, very strong. But in this one, I feel like it's a more balanced one where you're not actually always chasing the AI who's just besieging you with units that you can't just quite catch up with. So they do a better job of balancing that, not really just beating the shit out of you with it.
Yeah, it's glad that they've also rebalanced it, because some of those old school RTS games could be real tough.
Yeah, especially when you've got now these myth units, right? Like, so it's like, here comes a gigantic centaur, you know what I mean? And it's like, okay, what do I have to stop this thing? So yeah, that's sometimes when the god powers are, you can use them on cooldowns rather than just being something that's like kind of like a passive.
All right. Let's go on to our number 3s. My number 3 is Dungeons of Hinterberg.
Oh, yeah.
Anyone else have that on their list?
I played it after you were talking about it. It was cool. Really enjoyed it. The art style alone is, you got to at least check it out for the art style. And I don't think it shows up well in photos. It's one of those you got to play it to really see it.
Yeah, it shows well in like specific screenshots. Like if you set it up nice with photo mode, sometimes you can get a really nice screenshot, but it looks amazing in motion. Like, we talk about bringing comic books to life, and this is it. This is like your old school like Belgian comic book, with the like space fantasy aesthetic that you would associate with like American comics.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. How they've done it.
In the images, if you see images of it, the cell shading looks a lot harsher, I think, though, than in game. In game, it works so much better. It's not as...
I'm looking at it on YouTube right now. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Because at first I was like, "Ooh, this looks rough," but then I played it. I was like, "Oh, okay, but never mind." That's one thing you've got to kind of break the barrier of.
So this is like, what if Persona were a European action RPG? And it is exactly that setup. You go adventuring in dungeons during the day, and in the evening, you meet up with your pals or do stat honing activities. The dungeons themselves here, they're not randomly generated. Each one is bespoke, has very specific puzzles, has really well designed challenges and fun combat, and they're super well paced. And you get really cool powers like riding around on a tornado to suck up enemies. That's always satisfying to do stuff like that. And what's really notable to me, like, people who've heard me talk on this podcast know that I'm somewhat disdainful of so-called cozy games, because I think they can kind of mask some, either in the game itself, some pretty noxious ideologies, or they kind of serve as a cover for pretty poor conditions under which the games are made in some cases. This is the rare cozy game that kind of interrogates its apparent coziness. Like, it's about, escaping to the Alps for an alpine vacation and throwing away your worries in a cozy little mountain town. But it interrogates your ability to do that. It also interrogates what your effect on the world is by doing that. Like, you are a tourist from the big city coming here to throw your cares away, and you kind of have this exploitative relationship with the locals. So it's interrogating that. It's also about tourism and environmentalism more broadly. And the story also tackles some issues related to labor and capitalism. So it's dealing with some interesting themes on top of being an interesting fantasy story set in the Alps. So really, really recommend it if you are into any kind of action RPG. If you like dungeon crawling, if you like puzzles, this is the game for you.
And there was another Let's Go on Vacation and Kill Stuff game as well. So that's 2 this year, right?
What was the other one?
It was like a top-down scroller shooter. I can't remember what it's called. It's like Slaycation. So I wonder if that's...
Slaycation is the slogan from Dungeons of Hinterberg. But we'll look up what this one is called, because I haven't heard of it.
Yeah, I think there was another one that came out. I don't know. Slaycation Paradise. That's what it's called. So I wonder if this
Slaycation.
I wonder if this is like a new genre, like go on vacation and kill stuff.
Slaycation Paradise. Let's
Yeah.
look this up. Oh, this is retailing for $1. Oh, this came out in 2022.
Yeah.
And it's currently retailing for $1.74. Not sure what that is in freedom bucks. And yeah, it has 90% off on Steam right now.
Yeah.
If you want a top-down shooter where you slay a bunch of stuff.
There's going to be a Canada's Drag Race spin-off called Slaycation.
Oh no.
Oh, really?
Where I think the premise is they're going to send a bunch of the queens on a vacation. Film it like I don't know that it's a competition.
Okay, so they're just going to be hanging out together. Like,
Yeah.
Are they going to go to like Banff? Where would they go?
It says here on Wikipedia, the series focuses on the personal and professional lives of 6 drag performers while they vacation together in a winter retreat. But it doesn't get more specific than that. Banff sounds pretty plausible to me. I wouldn't be surprised.
I mean, winter retreat could be anywhere. We could just send them to Iqaluit.
Yeah.
They can slay some polar bears. Let's make it happen. So yeah, Dungeons of the Hinterberg, really great game. LittleMac, what's your number 3?
So, you said you didn't want to put a game on your list when you'd only played 25 hours of it. So, I've played maybe like 20 minutes of Dragon Quest III HD 2D remake to date. But I am able to combine my knowledge of the original game with what I saw that they had added to it in the very, very, very early going, with just how beautiful the HD 2D style is and how great it looks with the Dragon Quest style applied to it. A kind of a whole new thing after, like, that HD 2D style they've mostly used for games that look like Final Fantasy as opposed to like Dragon Quest. And it just seems incredible to me. I'm so excited to actually play the whole thing, but
Yeah, I'm about 10 hours into it or so, maybe a little bit more. I got it for Christmas, and I've been really enjoying it. I had asked for it as a Christmas gift, kind of threw it out there because the reviews were kind of mixed, and I found that they don't really align with my experience of it. I don't think it's too hard. I don't think it's got an outrageous encounter rate. It's just a really solid JRPG, and like you said, it's gorgeous, and the soundtrack I think works really well as well. I think the soundtrack is less circusy than what I've heard from Dragon Quest before. It just sounds really good.
yeah, and Dragon Quest III is just it's one of the few major JRPGs that has the style of, you create a character, you create a party of units of a class that are not predefined characters in the story. Although in this remake, they sort of have like personalities that are assigned to them.
Yeah, well, the personalities just determine their stat growth, essentially. And there are accessories that will temporarily change it as long as they have them equipped. And you can also find books that will change their personality. So it's kind of like, if you want to get into the min-maxing aspect, that's one angle of it.
I hadn't gotten far enough to find out that detail. And there's sort of a little sort of dream sequence at the start that determines the hero's personality based on some things that you do. So
yeah,
really,
they take a little quiz, and I got daydream.
Yeah,
no idea what it does, but I'm a daydream.
That resonates with me deeply because the Ultima, the character creation system of Ultimas 4 through 6, which all have the premise of you wander into a fortune teller's tent and she asks you a bunch of questions about tricky moral situations and what you would do. It's just it's a great way to create it. I'm a sucker for those things. I don't think that aspect of Ultima was ripped off enough in the RPG genre. And so I love those additions. But then just like regular Dragon Quest III, it is kind of a hard game with a high encounter rate, but it's a good hard game with a fairly high encounter rate. And I mean, in fact, I would go far enough to say it's a charming world. It's a fun kind of open-ended quest where you never really like completely clueless about what you should do next, but you've got some freedom to wander around and look for stuff. It's a great game, and I'm very, very excited to finally get to play more of it. Enough so that I felt confident putting it above a game that I actually did play entirely to 100% completion.
Yeah. This is like I really like the HD 2D art style when it's deployed nicely. I really like when I saw it in Aiden Chronicle. I really like what I saw of the trailers for this. And maybe, who knows, I'll dive into some retro JRPGs and give it a go. Skeletons, what's your number 3?
My number 3 is Astrobot. Anyone else have that?
Is that on anyone else's list? All right, Astrobot, let's hear about it.
Well, like I said, it is Super Mario Galaxy 3, and I love the Super Mario Galaxy games. Still mad that Nintendo did not do a remaster of Super Mario Galaxy 2. But Astrobot is that same kind of thing. You know, you've got these very disparate little worlds that are out floating in the galaxy, and you have to go there and get to the end of an obstacle course. It's very much an obstacle course kind of platformer. You know, you're not wandering around big open levels for the most part. There's like one or two that's like that. But for the most part, they are linear obstacle courses where the challenge is, you know, dodging, jumping, timing, all of that. And it is a little bit of a sort of a Sony propaganda machine, because one of the things you do is, in order to progress, you have to rescue other little Astrobots, most of whom are dressed up like characters from various video games. So you might find an Alucard Astrobot somewhere in peril that you'll have to rescue, and then he'll go and hang out in the hub world, ready for you to use to unlock another path to levels. And your ultimate goal in each of the different sets of levels is to get a piece of your spaceship, which is just a PS5 that's flying through space. So you have to go and get you have to get the cooling system, and you install it back in it. It's all very charming. You know, it's an advertisement, but it's not really making a secret that it's advertising. A lot of the games that are represented are third-party games. You know, there's a lot of stuff from Capcom and Konami. A lot of
I don't know why, but like, I find Funko Fusion doing this really crass, but I don't really mind PlayStation doing this, and I have no idea why.
Well, for me, I feel like there's more respect for deep cuts. And even bad games, like you can find that stupid thing from Knack. That big giant, remember Knack? Astrobot remembers Knack, because you can find one. And so it just feels like they kind of understood, you know, hey, even if they weren't great games, people were doing fun stuff and, you know, at least doing interesting things with some of the hardware, and they deserve a nod. And there's also some deep cuts, little details. For example, you can find the Amaterasu Astrobot from Okami.
Oh, nice.
It's got a little Shinto thing, and there's a little Isun jumping up and down on its head, and if you whack it, it howls and runs in a circle. Other ones have little fun animations that are just kind of good jokes about it. You know, Jill Valentine trying to figure out a key to the Resident Evil 2 police station, not noticing that the key she's looking for is right by her foot. It's just cute little things. And I think that's fundamentally what was so good about it. It was a game where the minute-to-minute gameplay is fun, it's tight. The advertising kind of things are mostly just cute, inoffensive. They're not like, you know, they don't feel like ads, I guess. They just feel like a fun celebration of these games that you've enjoyed. And you're still getting these unique levels with cool power-ups, lots of really good uses of the PlayStation tech, from the vibration of the controller to physics stuff. Just really impressive all around.
Yeah, like I said earlier, I'm really excited to finally give it a go when I can. And I'm hoping that they eventually port it to PC so I can play it. If not, maybe when they eventually like release a PS6, I'll be able to hop on the Astrobot bus, the Astrobus, if you will. Kappa, what's your number 3?
Balatro, of course. I mean,
Is
I don't
Balatro
know.
on anyone else's list? Oh, shocker!
Oh my
Only on
gosh.
Kappa's list. Yeah, I haven't played Balatro. I'm a
Okay.
roguelike guy, but
Uh,
I'm very eager to hear about Balatro
I
from you, Kappa.
I resisted it for a while. I have a love-hate relationship with roguelikes. I think there's almost like two forms of roguelikes in my mind, right? There's the one that like is maybe like Hades, where like it's fun to play through and then you die and then it's still fun to play through again, right? And then there's other ones where it's like it's fun to play through and then you die, but it's not fun to kind of like get back to where you were, right? I don't know how much that makes sense, but in my mind it
Yeah,
makes
I get
sense.
what you're going for.
But like the process of getting back to where you were needs to at least be somewhat enjoyable, or it feels like you're kind of like beating your head against the wall. The number one thing Balatro does is it makes every round feel fun, right? And even as you start to develop, you're like, this is how I like to win. These are the type of hands or decks I like to create. Kind of learn like there's pros and cons. I mean, obviously there's some like you could probably go to a website. It's like these are the definitive ways to play this, right? Um, but for my money, it's way more fun just to kind of like hey, what does this new card do? Let me see what I can work with in my hand to do this and stuff like that. And as you kind of um, as you kind of like slam through the levels and stuff, you start to do things that make you feel like you're smart. You're like, wow, that was really clever of me to realize that this card would work with this card, would work with this card. And because I did that, it made this thing that felt impossible actually feel super easy. And that's like in puzzle games that make you feel smart are a secret like weapon almost. I don't know how to describe it, but like a lot of games, I think, it doesn't do a good job of making you feel like you figured out the puzzle or whatever through your own. It makes it feel like the game gave it to you, or
Yeah.
but not that's not Balatro. I mean, it is so random in the way it approaches a lot of things, right? That over time you're like, okay, well, I know these cards do this, and I can combine it with this, and I can make it do this. But will this even work? And then you have an idea for a set or like a Joker run or something like that. And yeah, I think over time you kind of create these ideas in your head that feel good when you pull them off. And that I think is the biggest highlight of Balatro. Um, the game itself, I mean, like the game is nothing amazing, right? It's good, but I don't want to like overstate like it's it's an indie looking game. It's very pixely and some of the stuff, and there's definitely going to be times where you're gonna be like, that was a total bullshit big blind or whatever. You're gonna there's definitely moments where you're like, this wasn't fair. I don't know why the game did this. But that's kind of few and far between, and then you start to realize the tactics that the game wants you to go with, and it's oh well, if I would have went this way with my deck building, I probably wouldn't have had that problem kind of reaction, I guess.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a game that rewards careful strategizing, and also a game that rewards repeated play.
Yeah.
So it's like that's the nice thing about roguelites is that there is that progression system underneath, so it's not just like a new painful thing every time.
Yeah.
And I think it's something I want to play at some point.
Yeah, I think I think that on mobile. That's kind of what I would say if you just want to dip your toes into it. I want to say it's maybe like $8 or $9 on like the Android store, or I don't know what it is on iTunes, but try it there first before you get into the whole PC one. I think they're very, very, very similar. I don't know if there's actually any differences to it, but it's that kind of thing where like you can do a couple hands on a ride home type scenario with it. That I think was a pretty good way to kind of just get into it. And then I ended up buying it on PC as well, because I was having such a good time with it on my phone. I was like, oh, I want to play this at home, and so I kind of have it on a second screen, and then I'll be watching a movie or playing something, and then hit a couple hands on it. It requires, I would say, a basic understanding of poker, like which hands are good and which hands are bad. But I think even if you don't know a lot about poker, within 20 minutes you'll be understanding, which hands are. But like, it does teach you what kind of person you are. Like, are you a like discard a bunch of cards trying to make a big like, like a full house or a royal flush or something, or are you like, I'm just gonna play the two pairs I have and not try to like chase, like something like that. And then if you build your deck to complement your play style and you level up your decks, or not your decks, but your poker hands, you can really do some fun shit in that game. When I was starting out, I was like, how the hell do I get 10,000 points? And then now I'm like making like million-point multiplier combos and stuff. And I'm like, oh, that's how you do it. So, but yeah,
Yeah.
you
Makes you feel like a big brain
yep.
genius.
And you learn a lot about your like, I don't know, it's like deep stuff. Like you learn a lot about yourself, about like what you chase, and then you play the game that way, and it's actually kind of fun.
Yeah, I just looked it up. It's $13 on the App Store.
Yeah.
On my iPhone. So I'll see. Maybe it's cheaper on the Switch eShop or something. Or you know what? Maybe I'll buy a Steam Deck one day and play it on that. All right, my number 2 game of the year, Like a Dragon: Infinite Wealth. Is that on anyone else's list? All right. So by now, listeners of this podcast know that I'm a big RGG fan. I play all their games. They put something out, I play it. Chances are I'll like it. I think their upcoming Virtua Fighter game is probably the next RGG game that I won't play. But other than that, I just keep playing whatever they put out, and I keep liking it. So this is an interesting game in that it's the first RGG or Yakuza / Like a Dragon game that's set outside of Japan. And half this game is set in Hawaii, in Honolulu specifically. So the story kind of splits in two. There's half of it that takes place in Yokohama, and the other half that takes place in Honolulu. And what they've created for the Honolulu map is this gorgeous rendering of it with they showcase the sunlight super well, and at night they show off the sunsets. And it's not that they're just showcasing it as an island paradise. It feels like a place where people actually live. And not kind of in the parodic way that you see in like a Grand Theft Auto. It feels genuine in excuse me, in a way that's quite rare in video games. So yeah, you run around both these towns, you get into turn-based combat, which when it was first announced for Yakuza 7, or Yakuza Like a Dragon as it's known in the West, people were really skeptical. And that combat system came out with Like a Dragon 7, and people generally liked it. They perfected it for Infinite Wealth. So what's unique about this combat system, it's turn-based but with physics. So how you orient an attack matters, where you stand in three-dimensional space matters.
I actually like that a lot. That's cool.
Yeah, it allows you to set up, depending on how you angle an attack, it allows you to set up combos. So if you knock your opponent into another opponent, you'll knock both of them over. If you knock one opponent into one of your allies, your ally will get a follow-up attack. Or you could knock an opponent into an exploding barrel, and they'll take damage from the barrel. Things like that. And this makes the regular attack fun. You're not just doing regular attacks because you don't want to waste MP. You're doing regular attacks because you can do cool things with them.
Yeah.
Which makes this combat system just brilliant at a basic level. What they've added for Infinite Wealth is that now you can move your character around in a small radius on your turn. So this allows you to kind of better set up combos and things like that. And it really just cracks that combat system wide open and makes it so much fun to play. As usual for Like a Dragon games, lots and lots of side activities. There's an entire Pokemon parody called Sujimon that's just stuffed in there because they can. There's a Pokemon Snap parody called Sicko Snap. They have an Animal Crossing parody in there, which isn't so much fun, but it's there and people really seem to enjoy it. It's just chock full of content. It's honestly a stupid, illegal amount of content. and I don't know how they pulled it off because I played this game for over 150 hours and didn't even complete the Animal Crossing thing in it. So there's a lot of stuff. Yeah, really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, like,
hard to recommend though.
Yeah, those kind of that's exactly what I was
because
going to say. You got me onto the dragon of those games, but it's so weird because like I enjoy when I'm playing it, but it's very hard to describe it as a game sometimes because there's so much,
Yeah, I really like a Dragon, Yakuza 7, but it was the first one I ever played, and I sort of feel paralyzed by the need to go back and play the older ones because like for the most part it was kind of a soft reboot, but then toward the end of the game it's like, oh no, it's not. It's definitely an ongoing thing.
Yeah, the reason it's so hard to recommend is because you have to play, 8 previous games to understand what's going on in this one, and that's just not fair.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm still...
Sorry, 9 previous games, my bad.
I'm ready to start my second one any day now, I'm sure.
Yeah. I would say, like, people will tell you to play all of them in order. Some of them are skippable. Like, you don't need to play Yakuza 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
You can kind of get what's going on in them from Yakuza 5. But, like, 0, 1, 2, 5, and 6 are, like, the big ones you want to hit.
Yeah. I'll give it a shot.
5 is, like, the really excessive one. I don't know how they pulled that one off. That's when where he plays 5 different characters. Yeah, a little too much, but really ambitious game for sure. And Infinite Wealth, it's a little bit more restrained in its ambition than Yakuza 5. You're only walking around 2 maps, but they're 2 huge maps with lots of content and lots of stuff to see. So if you want to get lost in a couple of open worlds for 100 hours, these are the games for you.
That's really cool.
All right, LittleMac, what's your number 2?
My number 2, which is fudging a bit on the notion of a 2024 release, because it officially released in 2023, but the Switch port came out in 2024, which is the one that I played. So I'm using it so that I can, have 4 instead of just 3 on my list. Darkest Dungeon 2.
All right.
Which I can't imagine anyone else has on their list.
No, because the rest of us follow the rules.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm kidding.
I'm doing the best I can here. I didn't try to come up with a reason that Ultima 7 Part 2 Serpentile counts. So, Darkest Dungeon 2, which I've played a lot of since acquiring it late in the summer, I believe, it's just really cool because if you played Darkest Dungeon 1, the premise is that you are the inheritor of this ancient estate with basically your ancestor was up to some Cthulhu shit or something like that. So you've got all these horrible dungeons basically around your home, and you recruit heroes, and you they're all these set classes, but then it just assigns some random name to the hero you just recruited, and you can have more than one highwayman or whatever. Mm-hmm. And you make little dungeon delving parties of 4 that go down into these dungeons, and then you explore the dungeon, and then the heart of the game really is a basic sort of 4-on-4 RPG combat system that really relies a lot on positioning. Like you see the characters splayed out in like a horizontal line, and each of the different ranks, both on the hero side and the enemy side, have a huge effect on who you can target, but also which of your moves you can do. And then, of course, enemies and you to the enemies will do things to force people into different ranks to mess with the other team. And for the sequel, they kept that core RPG combat system and a lot of the basic principles of a lot of the core classes that they made up for the first one. Mm-hmm. And then they threw everything else out. So it's no longer, you're not managing a big stable from your home. You're actually on a journey to get to a mountain. And at the start of each journey, you pick 4 characters to come with you. And they start from level 1. Like you're not building them over and over. They start back at 0 every time you start the quest over. and now they all have their own name and their own backstory. Like they're characters in a more like a later JRPG sense, as opposed to say the first game, which might be more like the first Final Fantasy or the first or the early Dragon Warriors. And so they just tossed it all out. And what you're doing for the carriage ride is largely like sort of like the Slay the Spire progression. You just have a bunch of branching paths and you choose which one to go down, and then a thing happens. And so they completely remixed this beloved game, which I just thought was such a bold thing to do with the way fandom can be on the internet. And I thought it paid off beautifully. Like the core parts that they kept are still great, but I really enjoyed like you gradually unlock the backstories of all the different characters, and they're fun and interesting, and the carriage journey is an interesting new challenging way to try to deal with this difficult game, and they were.
Now I haven't played much of 2. I played a ton of 1. Now they let you decide what you're going to be bringing into each mission now in 2. Is that what it is? Is that what the carriage part is?
So at the very start, when you set her on your carriage ride from your mansion, one of the first stops is the crossroads, and there you pick your 4 heroes, and along the way, so then you have to pass through 3 different regions to get to the mountain, basically. And at the end of each region, you reach an inn where you have a chance to, use some special inn-only items to try to improve the sanity and the relationships of the characters and give them little boosts. And also, if one of your characters gets killed, which is quite likely to happen, you are incentivized twice to try to make it to the next inn. First, because you get more of the like game currency that lets you unlock new stuff if you make it to the inn versus if you just give up because one of your characters died. But also, when you do make it to the inn, well, now you can replace that character with a different character.
So, like, if you have, like, that character that's, like, they're about to go crazy, you're like, okay, you stay behind.
Yeah, and so it's really cool just because it doesn't try to give you more Darkest Dungeon, but it does. It still feels like Darkest Dungeon, but it's like a new thing. I thought it was really brave of them to try it, and I thought it works really, really well. I've played a lot of it.
First one.
I honestly, I think I like it better. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Because I'd have to go back to play the first one, but I really, really, really like it.
The first game is a game I always wanted to like because I like the aesthetic so much, but mechanically it's basically XCOM, except you kind of see everything there is to see in about an hour of play, and it takes like a minimum of 40 to complete a campaign. The characters only have a certain number of skills. All you're ever doing is leveling up the skills, and you have to level up the characters, but they're going to die all the time, and you can't go into the high-level dungeons with low-level characters, or vice versa. And it just seems like the sequel boils it down. It's a roguelike instead, and it gives you the experience without making you do all the drudgery.
Yep, and that's exactly what I was getting to. Like what I was talking about earlier with Balatro. Darkest Dungeon 1, I think, had a fair amount of drudgery, if you want to get to it like that, on different runs. But I enjoyed it, but definitely was like a game you'd want to sit down and play for a couple hours and like push through it. It wasn't like a stop and pick it up type game.
The first Darkest Dungeon really, in a way, almost harkens back to wizardry, in the same way of like the permanent death adds to the stakes, and like so like it has value in the game and to making every decision count. But then if you get party wiped when you're late in the game, it's like, well, okay, now I'm going to create a whole new party and grind them up so I can go back to the and it's exactly the same. I remember the first time I made it to the Darkest Dungeon at the end, got to the final boss, not knowing what it was going to be, didn't have the right like loadout to fight it, got slaughtered, and then there was like probably like 5 hours or more of grinding to get back to it the second time with a party that I knew was set up to fight that boss. So that was kind of a drag. and you don't get that in Darkest Dungeon 2. Although I will say, I did see that there was a lot of discontent on the internet about the carriage ride itself, because while the each region is like that Slay the Spire type flowchart, but you actually ride the carriage in between the points, and you can control, like, you can move the carriage left or right, but that only really matters for like a little sub game of, like, if you hit a pile of leaves, you might get a random item from it.
Mhm.
But then otherwise, just like, you're just on the path. And so, like, there's maybe like 10 seconds of just atmospheric carriage riding between the events, which I liked. I found it immersive, and I didn't mind slowing down. I think sometimes it's good if a game forces me to slow down a little with my addled ADHD brain. But I did see that a lot of people in their addled ADHD brains felt the exact opposite way. They were like, "Oh my god, why are you making me wait for 10 seconds for the next thing?"
Yeah,
I can
I
see
know
that.
exactly what you mean. Yeah, the frustrations I usually have with those types of games are more in like the getting back to where I was needs to be a little bit more fun. But yeah,
All right, so that was Darkest Dungeon 2. Skeletons, what's your number 2 game of the year?
My number two is I feel like it may also be a bit of a cheat because it's really just a re-release. Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance. It's the new version of Atlas's SMT5 from, when was that? 2022.
Yeah, they added a new like side story kind of thing, right?
Well, it's more of an overhaul mech. So it's the same gameplay. There's new demons to fuse, and all that. But instead of just expanding the story, and there are new side quests, and there's some new traversal options and stuff to kind of add more treasures to find and whatnot, they actually made an entirely separate secondary story where at the beginning of the game you choose, do you want to play the original or do you want to play the new story? And this new story has, the original game had, I want to say, 3 or 4 endings. The new story branch has just 2, but it's a much better story than the original one was. That was kind of my big criticism of it when it released, was that SMT compared to like Persona, which is a Shin Megami Tensei spinoff, is less story focused, but that doesn't have to mean a bad story. It just means it's not, so cutscene driven. But SMT5's base story is kind of bad. Very little happens. You don't really give a shit about any of the characters because so little happens. A lot of stuff doesn't feel very well explained. It's sort of underbaked. It felt like a first draft. And the new route does not feel like that. The new route has characters, has stakes, has villains. The new villains are the Kadishtu, who are led by Lilith and are like 4 goddesses who are out for vengeance against the patriarchy, basically. And by the end of the game, you'll have them in your party, and they're great. And you can just kind of keep leveling them up all the way to the end of the game, and they're awesome. But yeah, even though it's basically just a polished remaster, I played this for 80 hours in 2022. I played it for 80 solid hours in 2024. It is just the most addictive JRPG loop out there right now, I think. If you like catching Pokemon, you have demons galore to sort of collect, infuse, and build up from crummy little fairies and like the equivalent of leprechauns and stuff at the beginning of the game, up to gods and goddesses at the end of the game. It's a great sense of power.
that sounds cool.
Yeah.
What platform did you play this on?
So the original release was Switch exclusive, but now it's on everything. The Vengeance is on everything. So I played it on PS5, and now it runs great. The visuals aren't technically amazing, but the art direction is strong. It's got that kind of Persona look where it's a lot of flat edges and things. It kind of plays well to Atlas's strengths as kind of a smaller developer than maybe people realize they are. And I think it's easy to overlook because the name, I think people are like, what is Shin Megami Tensei? I don't know what that is. But if you played Persona 5, it's just Persona 5's gameplay, except all of your party members are the demons instead of it just being Joker.
I haven't followed enough of the story to know like what happens with some of those. It seems like there's always kind of like a rotating cast of. I think Joker's the most popular one. I'm assuming.
Persona.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
from Persona 5.
he's only in Persona 5 and its spin-offs, and I guess Super Smash Bros. Shin Megami Tensei 5 has its own like cast of characters. I think each SMT game is kind of its own independent thing, like each Persona game. And there's like common elements between them.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
kind of
well,
a
the
vague suggestion of a
demons are
multiverse
very
thing.
consistent.
Yeah,
Sorry,
the
correct.
roster
Yeah.
of monsters tends to be real consistent. There aren't quite as many as I think there were in the 3DS games, but that's just because now they're full 3D models and not just 2D sprites, so probably require more resources to make.
Yeah, I really like that Atlas has kind of got these two tracks now where they've got their SMT and SMT alikes, which have kind of don't have like that time restriction that you have in Metaphor and Persona. And they've got their calendar games, and I think having both of those approaches works really well for Atlas.
Yeah, the way
So SMT5 looked really cool to me. I didn't have time to dive in, but I'm interested in giving it a go.
it's worth your time if you like JRPGs because it's fun and they've gotten a lot better about the difficulty settings over the years. Like the old ones were just punishing, and that's not true. They even have like a baby mode that you can download as free DLC if you really need it. But if I played it on easy on the Switch because I was a little rusty and took some getting used to things, but having played on easy on the Switch, I was able to go up to normal in this one without an issue. So it's great fun.
I'm guessing like easy in SMT5 is probably like normal in Persona 5, right?
Probably, yeah. Maybe that's an okay way of looking at it. It's if you play Persona 5, the bits where you negotiate with the demons and you fuse them to get the stuff for Joker.
Yeah.
That's the core gameplay of all SMT games. It's just that the protagonist is on the field and you just level them up like a normal character when they level up, and your other slots are filled with the demons that you recruit and fuse.
Okay, yeah, that is a really neat setup. It reminds me a bit like did you play Soul Hackers 2?
I did not. I heard mixed things about it, but it's one of those ones that if I ever
Yeah, don't play it. No, it's what I'll say about Soul Hackers 2 is that a lot of really neat ideas, and it's just completely tanked by awful dungeon design. And if it had good dungeons, it would be a great game. But the dungeons are really, really bad. But what was interesting about Soul Hackers 2's combat system is that you could get any of the demons that you captured or recruited, and it could assign them to any one of your party members. So it was effectively that kind of setup, where it was whatever demon you had equipped, and then whatever demon your party members had equipped. Yeah, and that allowed you quite a bit of flexibility.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, SMT5 Vengeance. Something I'm very intrigued to play at some point. Kappa, what was your number 2?
Space Marines. Number 2. Yeah, so I had Helldivers.
Did anyone else have this on their list? Okay, let's talk about Space Marine 2.
So I had Helldivers on my, outside of the top ones. And I think this is kind of an interesting, I think this one might depend on kind of where your group of friends went between, Helldivers and Space Marines. Because very similar functionally, games, right? As far as, you're getting in the squad, go around, do missions and stuff. But I really enjoyed Space Marine for a lot of different things. One, I really like the customization. I feel like the classes all play very differently. The looks, the sounds, everything feels very Warhammer. You stomp things and crush things. Originally, kind of the health system kind of drove me a little bit crazy because in Space Marine 1s, if you executed things, you got your health back, right? So that was kind of a cool mechanic to kind of push you to being aggressive, right? They got rid of that, and in its place are kind of some different mechanics that will give you shields and kind of like armor, but not so much health. So you need to think a little bit harder, I think, about what you're bringing into the battles as far as your equipment and stuff. But overall, I think the most fun I had with it was just playing with friends, doing all the kind of stuff that you normally do, and just running through a map and stomping stuff and shooting stuff, and you know, rescuing your friend from the grasp of a lurker or whatever. But you know, I think a lot of stuff was kind of made about this game when it came out. That was kind of like a return to, you know, old school gaming and stuff like that. And I don't know about that. I mean, I don't think it's old school. I think it's got a lot of fresh ideas and stuff. I think what people were really kind of like resonating with it is it felt like, you know, from the second you picked the game up, you knew what the game was and you knew what it was doing, and you kind of just ran with it from there. But yeah, it's gotten plenty of, you know, kind of patches and love and stuff like that since. Um, but it's kind of had some of the same problems where Helldivers has, where some things that are maybe, you know, too powerful kind of got a little bit reworked, and the community hated that and stuff like that. But I do think they're listening as a little bit maybe better than the Helldivers devs were, at least initially. So I do think that there's a lot of like, let's not break this thing. We got a pretty good thing going right now, as far as what I've been seeing from the devs of Space Marines. So I knew I wanted it when it was announced. I knew I wanted it when it came out, and I really enjoyed my time. I think I've got 4 maxed out classes. Kind of taking a break on it until there's some more content coming in a few months. So, but yeah, I mean, I think if you got a friend group that's kind of bouncing around, like I think most of us do, you know, between some of those types of games, I think you do a lot worse than Helldiver or Space Marines 2 than I think kind of as a option over Helldivers.
Yeah, as someone who bounced off Helldivers to a large degree, I've been kind of intrigued to give this one a go. Did you ever end up finishing the campaign?
Yes.
I know
Yeah.
you-
I mean, the campaign is very short. It was one of those things I kind of put on the back burner. You know, I had that thing. Well, let me check out the multiplayer first. You know, and then like 400 hours later, it's like, oh yeah, the campaign. You know, I know there's a lot of Warhammery lore that people have kind of been bristling a little bit about what some of the implications were, and I don't know enough about that honestly to really have an opinion on it. But very well voice acted. I did like it. I kind of, you know, in the back of my mind was what's his name? Witcher guy, Henry Cable, is his name?
Henry
Henry
Cavill?
Cavill?
Yeah. I know he's been wanting to make a Warhammer show forever. I think it just got greenlit, and like in the back of my mind as I was playing the game, I was like, I could actually. This is one of the first times I actually could see that kind of happening. So interested to see where it goes. The game itself, though, you know, it's got that Warhammer thing where, you know, you're painting but not painting, but customizing your characters and doing things like that, and really, you know, every little couple levels, and you gain levels pretty fast in the game. Every couple of levels, you're getting new things that you can really just kind of customize your character with, and some of them look really cool. But it's all in that Warhammer, you know, look to, you know, skulls and gold and everywhere. And so, I think that if you were looking for that Helldivers type game, but you want to feel like everything that you're earning isn't coming from a battle pass, that's the big improvement to me over Space Marine, over Helldivers, right? Because I got sick of like, okay, this weapon sucks, I'm going to buy the battle pass and hope these weapons are good. Was a very odd way to approach a looter shooter to me. Well, I mean, I don't know if you technically would call Helldivers a looter shooter, right? But like, you know, I did not like getting weapons and feeling like they were weak after having basically paid for them. Whereas in Space Marines, you see what you're getting right away, and it's all unlocked in game. So
Yeah, it's nice to feel like part of my problem with Helldivers was bouncing off because I got confused by all the currencies.
Yeah.
It's nice to have something with a pretty like tame progression system where you're not like fiddling around with 6 different types of resources.
yeah, and I really felt that as well when I was playing Helldivers. I was like, okay, well, my friend's got this cool thing. Well, where do I get it? Haha, you don't. You know, unless you want to buy the battle pass, and you know. So yeah, that was kind of frustrating, and I don't feel that as much with Space Marine. I mean, are there things you can buy? Yeah, absolutely, but none of the stuff that I I felt like everything was just do a couple more missions and I'll get it anyway.
Yeah, I think we're seeing maybe the pendulum swinging back a little bit from just live service fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll talk about this more when we talk about our surprises of the year. But I picked up Dark Tide on PS5
Yeah.
when that released, and I don't think it's presented well. Like it looks way more confusing than it is, but its progression system actually, I think, feels like it's a response to that people getting a little sick of progression for progression's sake, and actually feels like it's thought through for the game that they've made and to make it fun and engaging rather than just a slog.
That's a good point, because I felt like with the model for Helldivers, the progression was the battle passes, right? And then they had that, like, the battle for Earth or the planets, but it was all kind of like under the table. And of course it came out, there's no real system to it. It's just the developers click in a box when they want the next phase to happen or whatever, which I of course suspected from the start that there's not really like a background sim running in that game, but of course it was revealed, and it all feels juiced to sell you a battle pass, which is not a good way if you're going to do weapons. For all the problems I've had, in and out of Destiny, I never felt like I was starving for guns, whereas when I'm playing Helldiver, I'm like, I would love to try a shotgun, and it's like, nope, you will not unless you're going to pay money for it. So yeah, that's kind of been my experience a little bit. And in Space Marines, it's very much the opposite. It's like, try whatever the hell you want, doesn't really matter, you'll get more in 2 more battles or whatever.
All right, that's Space Marine 2. Let's move on to our games of the year. My number one game is drum roll, please. Actually, don't make a drum roll. 1,000 Times Resist. Does anyone else have that on their list?
I know you talk about it a lot, though.
Yeah, I've been mentioning it a lot just on discussions around the avocado and other places. This is a very hard game to explain, but let me try. So, gameplay-wise, this is a cross between Tacoma and What Remains of Edith Finch, but the story is equal parts The Giver, Arrival, and Near Automata. Yeah. So, here's the basic premise. Humanity was nearly entirely wiped out by a disease carried by an alien invasion. The disease, the first symptom of the disease is that you start tearing up uncontrollably. That's symbolism. We're going to get to that in a little bit. And 1,000 years later, society's been rebuilt underground, led by the lone survivor, referred to as the All-Mother, and her clones. And you play as one of those clones, reliving the All-Mother's memories. And you learn about her childhood, the way she was brought up, what happened that caused this global pandemic and the alien invasion, and then what happened in its aftermath. And you're kind of uncovering history while events are also going on in the present. And you're ping-ponging back and forth between different time periods, both like in what's called a communion with people sharing their memories with you, and also living moments in the present. This game is a masterclass in storytelling.
It's got to be.
It's told
got a
kind
lot
of
going on, so yeah.
Yeah, so the way this is set up, if they told this linearly, it would still be a good story, but it's told non-linearly in a very specific way to reveal very specific information at very specific times. So every time, it doesn't keep holding on to questions towards till the end. It'll pose a question, answer it, and that answer will be a twist that gives you a whole bunch of new questions. You're constantly learning things that reshape your understanding of the world, while also giving you mysteries to chew on for another chapter or so. So extraordinarily well paced, and also we talk about games being really cinematic, and we talk about cinematic games, we think about like your Naughty Dog, your Sony Santa Monica kind of games that have this really high fidelity kind of presentation. And this is an indie game made by a small studio. I think it's the debut game of an indie studio called Sunset Visitor, based out of Vancouver, Vancouver, Canada, not Vancouver, Washington. And so, like, they don't have a lot of resources, but they still managed to create one of the most cinematic games I've ever played, just by really, really smart understanding of camera angles and lighting, like no other game I've played before in my life. And it's also this really, like, this is a game that really wears its influences on its sleeve, both artistically and also the real world inspirations behind it. I decided to get back to the concept of tears. That's symbolic of the effects of tear gas. This is very much a game made in the wake of the 2019 Hong Kong protests. In fact, they form, like, the protests are an actual part of the historical part of the narrative. It's clearly been influenced by the COVID-19 pandemic. It's also greatly influenced by both Canada-China tensions and also intra-community tensions in the Chinese-Canadian community. So it's dealing with all these really heady, really, really difficult subjects and blending them all into this really compelling sci-fi narrative to tell a story about history, how we deal with it, and how we choose to remember it. So if you're into narrative games at all, if the word walking sim does not turn you off, go play this game. I beg you to play it. It is fantastic.
Yeah, and I heard nothing about this before, so this sounds really cool.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
PC Gamer had some good things to say about it. I saw it just this past week.
Yeah, it's like, I think this is really, like, made the rounds in critics circles. I don't know how well it's been playing with, like, the wider audience, or if, like, gamers as a whole have, like, glommed onto this one. But it's got really positive word of mouth, so I'm hoping that it's a financial success for Sunset Visitor and they can keep making games because these folks really have something special. LittleMac, what's your game of the year?
My game of the year, I assume, because I played much more of it than Dragon Quest III, but I haven't finished the whole thing. But based on everything I've heard, I see no reason to believe it's not going to stick the landing. Is Legend of Zelda: Echoes of Wisdom, which I just acquired as a Christmas present for anyone who's not in the know. The premise here is it's the first Zelda game where Zelda is the protagonist character who you play as opposed to being, she's often the protagonist of the story. You know, like Breath of the Wild is the story of Zelda fighting Ganon for 100 years while Link takes a nap. And then he comes and kind of helps out a little. This is a game where you start out and it starts in media res at the ending of a Zelda story. You're Link, you're charging in to save Zelda, you get to Ganon, you win the fight with Ganon, and then Ganon opens a rift in the ground and it sucks Link in, and just before he's consumed, he pulls out his bow and he shoots an arrow at the gem that Zelda is like crystallized inside of, and it cracks, and then he's absorbed and the rift closes up, and then the crystal breaks and Zelda hits the ground, and now you're Zelda. And
all right.
yeah, so and then so it's made in the same engine as the Link's Awakening remake that they did a few years back, which I have not played, but now having played this for a little bit, I'm like, oh man, I should check that out. That's probably a really enjoyable remake. But so it's got that like top-down 3D style, but the gameplay is like, you know, more like a classic Zelda. And Zelda's thing is that her main power isn't sword fighting. Her main power is she has a rod that can learn to create objects in the game. And so as you go through the game, you find things, you tap the rod on them to learn them, and now you can create a table whenever you want. Or you can create a crate whenever you want, or you can create a boulder or what have you. And so you get faced with these puzzles, just like, how do I get up to that thing? Well, I'm going to create a table, and then I'll create a crate, which is twice the height of a table, and I'll hop onto that, and then I'll make a crate beside me, and then I'll put a table on that crate, and then I'll hop up onto that, and then I can make it all the way up. And so it brings in that kind of Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom style of the puzzle is, how are you going to do this? And the solution is whatever you figure out that you can do with the toy box you've been given, as opposed to, the solution is to push this block 4 spaces over and then 1 south. And I don't even have a problem with that kind of, like, here's the correct solution puzzle that you reason out. But it's a really kind of fresh puzzle solving thing. And then once you start defeating enemies, which at the start you're defeating them by throwing pots at them, but you defeat an enemy and then you learn that with your staff. And in addition to creating a box or a table or a boulder or a whatever, you can create a keys, or you can create a rope, which is what the snakes in Zelda are called, or you can create a moblin, and then they'll fight for you. And they all have, different, part of the game is figuring out which enemies have the abilities that are going to counter the enemies that I'm fighting right now. Or how can I deploy this enemy and then deploy this monster and then support them so they can get shots off at this thing before it kills them. And it's really neat. I got it for Christmas, and I'm just working my way into it, but I've made it far enough that it's opened up to a point where I've got 2 objectives and no like rule that says you got to do this one first. And so it's going to do that kind of, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom quest where ultimately you do have this quest, but like you're going to tackle it the way you like and kind of figure out your way through it.
Kind of reminds
really
me
cool.
a little bit of sounds a little bit like Scribblenauts. Do you remember Scribblenauts?
I do. I never played it.
Well, in that game,
but
you could kind of say hey, I want to, give me this. Once you learn certain things, you could write it down and the game would give you that thing, and that's how you would solve the puzzle. I really like that style of play.
Yeah, it's a much more structured version
of Scribblenauts. Yeah. It's not just whatever you can think of. You can't write Godzilla or whatever, right?
Yeah, and I think that's to the game's benefit, honestly.
Yeah.
It's not just mindless.
Yeah, it definitely was mindless because, once you learn something in Scribblenauts that works for 90% of things, you just always use that thing.
Yeah, you kind of have to make your own fun when you play with Scribblenauts.
Exactly.
Whereas Echoes of Wisdom, my understanding is it has that problem to some extent, but for the most part, you do have to think on your feet and come up with clever solutions to problems.
Yeah, and so far, I'm still I'm just making my way into it, but already there's been things like there's a type of spider enemy, the Strandula, so named because they're always hanging from a single strand of web. And when you create those after you've defeated one, maybe it'll fight for you. I've not even tried to deploy one in a situation with other enemies, but what it does do for you is you create it and it instantly shoots its strand up to the ceiling, and now you've got a rope that you can climb. And so now you approach height puzzles in indoor environments, and you got to think is the way to do this to try to build a stack, or is the way to do this that I'm going to just climb up a rope? And I can tell that it's going to, keep on unfolding new interesting things that the different items and enemies can do for me. And yeah, I was expecting to like it. I wasn't necessarily expecting to play it for a few hours and be like, this is the best new game I played this year. But I can tell that it is. It's really cool.
That sounds cool.
All right, Skeletons, what is your game of the year?
My game of the year is Persona 3 Reload.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I want to preface this by saying I've not played any version of Persona 3 before, so some of the criticisms that people have had of this remake, I can't really speak to. So I can only kind of take it as what it currently is. But I have to say, I think that of the Personas I've played, this is the best one now. And I think part of it is it feels more cohesive than some of the other ones. It has this kind of big fixation on life and mortality. All of the social links are about dealing with the various stages of life. Looking at what your life is now and whether you're happy with it, looking at what the future holds and whether you're prepared for it, looking back on the past and reconciling with the reality of what's happened with people who are young, who are middle-aged, who are old. And it feels a lot, ultimately ends up feeling like it has a little bit more to say than some of Atlas's usual games. And to back up, the premise of this one is that, just like the other Persona in most S&T games, really, you're a high school student, you are a new transfer student at this fancy school that is on this kind of, I think it's an artificial island, and you discover that at night, at midnight, time freezes, and there is this extra hour that takes place where just some people are awake, and this has to do with a mysterious tower rising up out of one of the school dormitories in town, and you are brought in to the cast to sort of work your way up this tower to get to the top, so to try to figure out what's causing this and fix it, so to fix the flow of time and the monsters that come out of this tower. So it's got a little bit of a almost Power Ranger-y feel as you're part of this team of other students called SEED. I forget what that stands for. They have their own little uniforms and everything. And so you're going up the tower, and each floor of the tower is just a randomized level. They're not very interesting in terms of layout. You just kind of run around, you fight enemies. Pretty standard stuff. If you play Persona 5, it's basically just Mementos. But that's it. That's kind of the entirety of the dungeon crawling experience. And whenever you're not doing that, you're going out and meeting your social links. But one of the things that I thought made this one such a good entry in the series is something that later Persona games do not do. Or rather, something that Persona 3 does not do that later games do, which is Persona 3 does not have your party members as part of the social link system, which sounds like a bad thing because that's one of the major systems of the game. Why wouldn't you want your party members to be involved with that? Well, the answer is if they are involved with this optional system where not every player will see everything or at the same point, then their stories have to be silent off. In Persona 5, An and Ryuji really don't have anything to do after the first dungeon because that's where they're introduced. And then after that, anything that happens with them that's meaningful to their growth as characters is optional as part of the social link. Which means that they just don't really have much to do. They don't really have an arc. There's a bit in Persona 5 where toward the end of the game, they were like, oh no, Ryuji's going to get crushed by a boulder. I forget what happened. But there's no stakes there because they're not going to kill him and he can't grow at all. It's just a thing that happens. In Persona 3, the characters all get to experience the story and have an active role from beginning to end and grow over the course of the story when it's appropriate. So there'll be times when they might be sort of like Junpei starts off kind of an outcast. He doesn't fit in. He wants to be useful and liked, and he can't figure out how to make that happen. And he's angry about it and kind of a jerk at times, but he gets to grow over the course of the whole game, and that's his whole arc. And that makes him much more likable, even though he fills the exact same role that someone like Ryuji would fill.
Yeah, I think the pitfall is exactly as you described. It's almost like they have to have, in Persona 4 and 5, the characters have to have two parallel character arcs that have nothing to do with each other, just in case someone doesn't complete the social link. And it kind of compromises both arcs, both the social link arc and the arc they have of the story. So I think I appreciate this setup that you've described in Persona 3 a lot more.
Yeah, and it's a problem, I think, even in Metaphor, which has the same setup and same problem. I don't know how far you are with that, but
I have not even met Heisme yet.
I was going to say
That is
Heisme is one who suffers especially from that because the seriousness of his sort of backstory versus how the game can't really deal with it as part of the main plot, it's noticeable. It's a noticeable disconnect. And Persona 3 just doesn't have that problem. So the story kind of ends up working out in a very affecting, good way. Everything feels thematically united. It just winds up being a solid JRPG, and I think it's just a solid entry in the series. And as far as the remake aspect is concerned, they've been able to iron out a lot of stuff, in terms of mechanics. I've heard that it's much easier in the original because now you can control your characters instead of letting brain dead AI control 2/3 of your party. And you now don't have things like there's no longer the option of a female protagonist, which is definitely a missed opportunity, but there's also no longer the option for you to romance the 12-year-old boy, which really stunned me when I learned that was something they added in as a PSP exclusive for, I don't know, kind of weird. Kind of real weird. But, it's a good party.
A lot of old Persona stuff is weird.
Yeah, but it doesn't have the rampant homophobia of Persona 4. It doesn't have the bloat of Persona 5 or the various flaws of Metaphor. I just thought this was... as you saw from my list, I played a lot of JRPGs this year. This was the best one.
Yeah, glad to hear it, and hopefully I find time to jump on that train.
People love
a fan
Persona.
of both Persona 4 and 5.
Yeah, it seems like every year there's a Persona that comes out. Everybody's like, "This is the one. This is so great." So yeah.
Well, I'm going to have a hot take about Metaphor, and we talk about disappointments.
Persona 6 is probably going to come next year, so I think that's going to start up the discourse machine again. So, strap yourselves in.
Rumor is the SMT team has something cooking too.
Ooh, Soul Hackers 3. I'm kidding. I think that franchise is dead now after what a flop Soul Hackers 2 was. Kappa, what's your number one game of the year?
Dragon's Dogma 2. I think people forgot this game even came out. But
I remembered. I was waiting to hear when it would come out because I know you enjoyed it.
I loved it. It taught me what all my friends are into, as their gigantic Amazon women are following me around. And it's always awkward, like, "Oh yeah, man, I hired your pawn." Like I told one friend, I was like, "Yeah, man, I hired your pawn. She's great." He's like, "Never hire my pawn again. Don't just." I was like, "What? What's wrong with that?" Like, it's like like some like cat ear, Whatever. I was like, yeah, you
hired
learn a
so
lot
many
about
cat
your
girls,
friends.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So many cat girls.
It's tough because I think that Dragon's Dogma is kind of like it was remembered really fondly for kind of after the first one came out, kind of like a cult classic type thing. But I don't know how the sales for this one really looked. I don't have a good feeling, and I think what a lot of the initial conversations about it were really more wrapped around the really weird microtransactions that the game had. I mean, just bizarre microtransactions, where you could buy things that essentially in the game you would get in about 15 minutes worth of effort. My conspiracy theory, we were talking about this when it came out, was that somebody higher up was like, "Hey, this thing needs to have microtransactions," and some kind of malicious compliance worker was like, "Yeah, fine, I'm gonna make the things that take 10 minutes in the game to get the the microtransactions." And
is this like when in Mankind Divided, where you could buy Praxis kits, but it's completely pointless because the game gave you so many?
Exactly like that. It's like in what was that? The game with Dante. I can never remember the name of that game. Where you got the sword.
Devil May Cry.
Devil May Cry would sell you souls, which you get from just killing enemies. Dragon's Dogma had basically that level of microtransactions, where it was like, hey, you can buy this thing that lets you fast travel, or in game you can just literally spend like $4 worth of gold to fast travel. But this thing is you can really buy it. The world is really cool. I kind of feel like the world of Dragon's Dogma is almost like the perfect fantasy world to me, where you've got this mix kind of like gothic European and kind of like Japanese like sensibilities about it. Really cool character design. The armor looks awesome. All the areas look really cool, and the monsters are amazing. They really do that scale of monsters that I think a lot of people resonate with some of the like the Souls games, right? And I think that with this game, the combat is very classic JRPG, with the classes and things like that kind of being the job system is what you replace kind of that dodge and roll and parry system with, right? Where over time your job um, builds up your strengths and stuff like that. And the jobs are linked to the weapons you use, so you can always kind of mess around and switch weapons and switch builds on the fly. You get a pawn, which is kind of like a helper, and you also just kind of in general get like people follow you around. You can have 3 pawns, so you can create kind of like a holy trinity group, and then your character is around. Cool, like just events that would pop up as you would walk around. I really loved stuff like that. I like the world. I like the characters. The story is really cool. I think it had pretty good sales. I know it had pretty good reviews, but of course, Game of the Year talk comes around and nobody's remember anything that came out. What did it come out like March or something? I mean, you come out around that time. Too bad. It's everybody's already forgotten about you. But I really liked it. I thought the scandal with the microtransaction was goofy that they even had it. But I think that anybody who played the game would be like, you'd almost be stupid to buy that microtransaction. Like it saves you seconds or minutes, not like pay to win basically. And I think that's what a lot of the kind of reaction to it was. Why are you selling microtransactions in a single player game? And then people realized, oh, this is almost unneeded. But I like the combat. I like the world. I'm hoping that we're gonna get more Dragon's Dogma. So this is my kind of personal stand that my game of the year being kind of a game that people forgot about. I feel like by now. And Dragon's Dogma 1 was very similar. Like it was a cult classic that years later people had to be like, yeah, don't worry about that dumb art on the cover. It's actually really good. And I think it became kind of a cult classic. And I'm hoping now that Dragon's Dogma 2, if it isn't already, some type of hit, people give it a shot, especially on some of these sales and stuff that I would see it on. I think I saw it for like 48% off or something. That's a steal for that.
Yeah, so it's a game that I've been fascinated by from afar.
You know how
haven't had time to
like how people
ahead.
talk about The Witcher 3? That was me and Dragon's Dogma 1. I just kind of felt like I was like this weird person who was like, wait, I actually really like this game, and like no one's talking about it. Now I kind of feel like that's me in like Dragon's Dogma 2, because like every other JRPG seems like it had some life and some hype around, and then this one kind of just came out. I think did pretty well in sales, pretty well in reviews, but it just feels like it dropped off the face of the world. I think it was nominated for like best RPG maybe in the Game Awards maybe.
I mean, I can look that up right now.
Which is
It was.
it? Okay, cool.
It was.
That's good to hear. I mean, I knew it was going to be Metaphor. I mean, obviously, the games that were in the best of the show are going to win those categories as well. So I didn't hold out much hope for it winning that, because I think like the best of the game of the year was like 3 games from that category. So I was like, yeah, I don't think that's going to be Dragon's Dogma winning that one. But
Yeah, you're right. It was actually 3 of those. It was Metaphor, Shadow of the Earth Tree, and Rebirth were all nominated for Game of the Year.
Exactly. So I was like, oh, whatever, man. So. At this point, I was kind of like gave up hope, but I really enjoyed it. I hope that it has life. I hope everybody gets to see all their horny friends' pawns running around the game. I was like, oh, because like your characters even say like, oh, your friend seems to prefer the company of women. All of his pawns are female, and it's like, oh, I know what you're saying. So it's kind of got little like dialogue lines like that kind of if you have all guys, it'll say something like do not fear to have a woman in the party as well. They can handle the strength of combat or something. So
Yeah.
I think that's kind of funny.
Yeah, I really enjoy that they have all these the simulationist aspect of the game, which you really associate more with like Bethesda games, and it's really neat to see a different take on it from a different part of the world. So yeah, really excited to eventually give that one a go at some point in my life. Now we get to move on to the fun part of the podcast, where we trash the things we didn't like this year. And I'm just going to throw out not my least favorite game of the year. My least favorite game of the year is Clickholding, but I've already talked at length about Clickholding on this podcast, and why that game is bad. So I'm going to talk about what is both my biggest disappointment, or one of my biggest disappointments, and I think it's my second least favorite game of the year, and that would be Neva.
Oh yeah. This one was this the game for Justice or whatever it was?
It was nominated for Games for Impact. I don't know why. It has nothing to do with any kind of social issue. I guess if you squint, it's about environmentalism, but not really, not in any meaningful way.
Like just go somewhere and fight one day, you and that award.
I mean, it's not only me. I think a lot of people share the same
dumb
criticism
award.
of that award.
The focus of it doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't. Like, I think if the goal was like, this game had a positive social impact because it brought something very specific to light, or something that, other people haven't, talked about or thought of. But a lot of times it's just like, this game is about the environment. You know what I mean? Or something like that.
Or like in the case of Neva, barely about the environment. It's just a tear-jerking indie game. Well, it doesn't really succeed at jerking the tears, but it tries. So this one was kind of a heartbreaker for me, because I really liked Studio Nomada's debut game, Gris. Kappa, I believe you also played that one. That really beautiful indie puzzle platformer. So I thought their follow-up, where they're like, okay, we're going to take what we learned from Gris and we're going to make a beautiful puzzle platformer that also has combat in it. And I was like, great, let's go for that. Let's see what happens. The combat is horrendous, and that's kind of the first part of this. Like, you're playing against spongy enemies. All you do is the same 3-hit combo over and over and over again. It's also doesn't control well enough, so it's too difficult for the kind of game it is.
That's a really good point, I think, that you're bringing up, because almost always, like, there's platformers that can have combat added seamlessly, and there's platformers the second you put combat into it, the whole thing falls apart, right?
This is one.
Yeah. I could having played. Don't make me say it, but Greece. Having played that,
I think it's Gris. It's Spanish, right? So
I
Gris.
having played it, I wouldn't want combat in that game, really. You know what I mean? I wouldn't want like a combat system involving combos or anything like that. No, it's like I don't know.
So that's what this has. Yeah. It's Gris with a combat system and worse platforming and worse puzzles, to the extent that there even are puzzles. And the platforming's not fun. The big problem, like, there are two fundamental problems here. One of them is that there's a focus on the visuals over functionality. So visuals don't really indicate what you can and can't do. There's one really, really infuriating boss fight that I was stuck on for a really long time, and it's because you need to air dash through the boss, but you can't roll through the boss's legs. I can roll between like animals' legs in real life. I can't air dash through their torsos. Torsos are solid, but in this game, I have to air dash through this pig boss's torso, and if I try to roll through his legs, I die. It makes no sense. Why can I air dash but not roll? And like, this kind of problem repeats itself throughout the game in various ways, where it looks like you can interact with something but you can't. Looks like something's a platform but it isn't. Looks like something's interactable but it's not. That sort of, like, if the visuals of your game don't indicate what you can and can't do, then your visuals have failed.
That's a really good point, because in a lot of like the Limbo knockoff era, you know what I'm talking about, they were
Yeah.
going for an aesthetic and forgetting that I still needed to know where the fuck I could jump. I know exactly.
The
what you
worst offender of this was another one that I talked about a couple of years back called Silt. I don't know if you remember me complaining about that game, which was essentially underwater limbo, and it had that problem up the wazoo. Like, just every single map on that game, you have no idea what you could interact with or what you couldn't interact with, and everything that you could interact with would instantly kill you. It was just one of the most frustrating games I've ever played. So eventually, the other problem you run into is that this is a game that's trying to emotionally manipulate you and fails. And if you try to get the tears out and the player's not crying, then it just feels so grating. And finally, it's just not even all that pretty. Like, yes, each individual frame looks pretty for the most part, but you're not constantly impressed by the visuals. Like, you see a frame, and then it's that kind of same pattern repeated throughout the rest of that chapter. The game has 4 chapters, really 3 chapters plus an epilogue. You just see the same visuals kind of over and over again. And there's one chapter in particular that actually isn't pretty. It actually is just ugly. It doesn't look good, and I think it was a failure of art direction that they used that particular aesthetic. And so that is also by far the longest chapter of the game. So you spend about 40% of the game in something that looks pretty ugly. And it just does not work out. So
yeah,
overall,
I think
big disappointment and really just an awful
I think
game.
you're onto something there, because you remember when like Trine was like the big whatchamacallit?
Like indie puzzle platformer.
And like you could almost do so much in the background that it makes what you're having to do in the foreground worse for it, right? Like the art looks great, but having to actually move through the game is annoying because of that.
Yeah. It's like this emphasis on visuals over, like, you can make beautiful games when you know what to do. And I take, there's all that yellow paint discourse we have right now. Like, I take the point that sometimes it's immersion breaking, but I would rather you break my immersion than frustrate.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, that's Neva. LittleMac, what about your disappointments this year?
Well, here's the very happy thing that I can report, which is that I only played 4 games that I could qualify for a list, and I genuinely, even my number 4, Princess Peach Showtime, I really enjoyed.
No disappointments. Just a
Yeah.
happy year.
I'm glad for your positivity.
I think my biggest disappointment was literally that I wanted very badly to spend my summer vacation playing Shadow of the Erd Tree, but for non-video game related reasons, that became not viable, and now I still haven't played it. But
well, there's always next year. Yeah, so hopefully you get the chance to play it. Skeletons, you teased something spicy.
Yeah.
Let's hear it.
So my biggest disappointment of the year was Metaphor ReFantazio.
Oh, wow. Oh, we're going to get angry letters now. I'm really looking forward to this one.
So I'll start with my more piddly, nitpicky things. First of all, I think the soundtrack is not very good. And I know that Atlas has a lot of different vibes for its games, and it's not fair to say they all should be as good as, like, Persona 5 is probably their best one overall, but I would expect there to be something in there that really stood out, but so much of it is just like weird tuneless yodeling, I guess. Like, my partner described it as being like an auctioneer, like, with music behind it. Like, it's not like Latin choir music or like Buddhist chanting. It's just gibberish.
Is it an Esperanto? That's what I've heard.
It could be. It doesn't. It does not gel with me at all, though. I cannot remember any of the tunes. And I played it for 80 hours. I beat this game, and I can't remember any of the music really. So I'm throwing that out there.
The only music I remember is the monk chanting because it's very funny to me. But yeah. So what are your other piddly complaints?
I don't think it actually looks that good, The art direction is very good, like the character designs and things, but like on a technical level, this is one of the worst Atlas games I've seen. Like, the forests are a perfect example. When you're in a forest dungeon and there are more than one, they all look the same. You're looking at, like, I would say PS2 quality trees on a perfectly flat ground with the trees are on little, like, rocks, basically, to create rooms. There's no hills, there's no terrain change. It is a perfectly flat space where you're just watching the mini map, going through these ugly trees that look worse than what you would see in, like, say, Final Fantasy X back in the PS2. Or I even pulled up, just to make sure I wasn't going to be comparing it too harshly, I was looking at, like, Dragon Quest VIII PS2 screenshots, and, like, you're looking at, like, those quality trees, but they're not even as dense as the Dragon Quest VIII ones. And I don't really understand why Atlas has such bad dungeons like that. Like, I guess maybe the fact that Persona games and even S&T is usually indoor modern environments and ruins maybe disguises that, like a limitation of what their team is able to do. But I just thought that the ruin temples and the forests and stuff in Metaphor are just not very impressive. And none of the dungeons are really anything more than just kind of walking around hallways fighting monsters. There's nothing on par with the palaces in Persona 5. And visually, like, Persona 3 Reload doesn't do anything with its dungeons, but, like, it's got, like, ray tracing and everything. It looks crazy at points for not even having them do anything. So it was very strange to me to play this third Atlas RPG of the year and be kind of unimpressed by it on that front. So those are my two piddly complaints. Here's the big one, though, that I've not heard anyone talk about, but which I thought kind of ruined the game by the end. The MP economy. So Persona games are always kind of about managing your resources, right? You know, you got your HP, you got your MP. With Persona, you have in Metaphor, you have the time constraint as well. So you want to push as far as you can in a dungeon to be efficient, but there's going to come a point where you've got to get out and heal because otherwise you can't progress. And you've got to use your MP because if you're not using the MP, you're not taking advantage of enemy weaknesses to get your extra turns.
Yeah.
And by the end of the game, I just did not have enough items to restore my MP to finish things. I would not have been able to beat the game, the final boss, except for the easiest difficulty setting where when your whole party wipes, they are immediately brought back to life with full HP and MP. And I don't know if I missed something, if there was something I should have been doing that I just didn't pick up on, but it's weird that I played two other Atlas RPGs, also 80 hours, one of which was essentially the same game, Persona, and did not have that issue. But in Metaphor, it almost made it impossible for me to win, to complete the game. And that just seems, I don't know. I don't know where the failing is, but that left a real bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah, it's tough when you can't figure out what you don't like or what everybody else does like when you don't like something, and it's just like you can't make that connection. I know exactly what you mean.
Well, I think like the first two complaints were just piddly complaints and the kinds of things that could be fixed easily. Whereas this other one is just like, it's a core gameplay thing. It's not, and it's a very specific one where I know what the problem is. I'm playing the game. I know how to play the game. I played it for 80 hours. Why am I suddenly not able to finish things? Because I don't have any MP items. What happened? I had MP items. I guess I shouldn't have used because I only had a few of them over the course of the game.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
The game is like, so there are like two kind of shortcuts around that, and one of them is, okay, there are two things I would say. One is that I think the game is like encouraging you to get in and out of dungeons. I don't like it's encouraging you to do it over multiple days, which like the other Persona games, they like encourage you in the text of the game, but really you should be able to make it through every dungeon in one day. Whereas here I think they really don't want you to do that, but again, there are ways around that again feel exploitative and weird. And the way that you get around that is by equipping archetypes that allow you to recover MP, which is it feels like a dumb hacky workaround, and you end up just doing a lot of grinding. So you'll just go back to like lower levels of a dungeon that you were in, so you can meet overworld enemies that are 3 levels up below you, and like grind to get MP that way. But it feels like such a weird, inefficient way of doing things. And if you're gonna set up the economy that way, you might as well just like give me back my MP if I make it through a certain part of the dungeon. So
I
it
guess
feels
I didn't
like,
think about doing that because it's not that's not intuitive to me because you're supposed to be pushing forward and leveling up. So JRPG, that's the goal.
yeah, it's like why you have to go travel through different parts of a dungeon that you've already cleared to go meet the lower level enemies. It's very counterintuitive, and it adds so much to the playtime. Like I'm 25 hours in and I haven't started the second main dungeon. Like I'm just about to start it.
Oh, it has
And it's
a
because I've had to
start.
do all this grinding.
It
Sorry?
has a glacial start too, even by Persona standards.
Yeah. I found I got into the action a little bit faster than Persona 4, but like compared to Persona 5 where you're like really just starting right away, it does get a little slow at the beginning. Like you start the action pretty close, pretty quickly, but it takes a while for the plot to get going. Like it doesn't get going till you've completed the first main chapter, which is it's a long time. You're like 15 hours in before you know what even is even going on in the plot. So yeah, there are ways like to kind of mess around with the MP economy a bit to like clear dungeons in one day, but you end up doing so much extra grinding that when you said you made through in 80 hours, I'm like, okay, I think I know what happened. Because I think it's going to take me probably 120, 130 to get where you got because I have to do all this extra grinding. And I'm thinking I'm just going to drop the difficulty down to easy to clear the game faster. But I want the challenge of the normal. So again, they have this problem with balance that they haven't really fully figured out in terms of setting up the game's resource economy.
Yeah, and I think the job system they used is a little clunky too because you end up so toward the end of the game you'll unlock these sort of master archetypes where each character will get sort of super archetype that's unique to them. But to get that, you have to master other ones. And if you have not guessed correctly which ones that you need to be mastering along the way and been working on that the whole game, it can be very difficult to get that for every character.
Yeah, like I said, a lot of extra grinding that feels like because the game is like a little bit more propulsive and in some ways a little bit easier than Persona, you don't like clue into the fact that the game also wants you to go back and grind. And then you get pretty far in the game, you're like, oh crap, now I've got like 18 hours of grinding ahead of me.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I personally don't think it's easier than Persona. Persona 3 Reload, I didn't grind at all. You go through, you do each level, and I never went back to grind for anything.
Yeah. Again, it's a pacing problem, and I really think they could have worked on this a little better, and ironed it out. Or if they really, really wanted you to take multiple days to do dungeons, they could put hard stops. Like they do it in a couple places in Persona 5, where you come up to an obstacle in a dungeon, and they're like, you can't progress. You have to do something in the real world to open up this door in the palace. And if they'd done something like that to regulate the pacing, then you wouldn't like be using these hacky workarounds to try to get through a dungeon in one day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about that?
No, that's just my hot take for the year is that I think, I was expecting Metaphor to be on my list because Atlas, had secured 2 spots already. I didn't think they would whiff it. And I don't really understand why everyone else is praising it so much because, like, it didn't even occur to me to use the workarounds you're talking about. But the workarounds you're talking about, can't imagine anyone thinking that would make a game better.
Oh, it's not fun. That's really the problem. Like you have to do unfun things to make the game fun, and it's not really that well constructed.
The old Final Fantasy.
So. Yeah, that a lot of JRPGs are like this. You got to eat your vegetables. Yep. Kappa, what about your disappointments?
So this might be maybe like a philosophical one. I'm not sure where to go with this, but MechWarrior 5 clans, I couldn't get into it, right? And one of the biggest reasons is the voice acting. But apparently the voice acting is like lore accurate to how the characters in that universe talk. Like they don't use contractions. They kind of use this like weird speak, like some kind of like contraction no, but we can also make other things short, like call ourselves clanners and stuff like that. um I The story was bonkers. I could not understand almost any of it. I felt like an idiot. And then like when they would give you like these exposition dumps in mission while you're fighting in a mech, of course, it's like the voice acting was distractingly bad to me, which it might not have been the voice actors. It might have been how they were directed to do it or how the lore accurate way that they talk. But it sounded like um, almost like bad AI reading things. Um,
Oh
yeah.
no.
And so like you'd get into the mission and like the one character would be like, we must not forget that for victory to happen, we should meet all of our objectives. Do we all agree, clanners? Yes, this is a good reason to follow all of our objectives. Like that's the dialogue, you know? And then you'd get into like the cinematic and it was just as bad. And everything is like the Smoke Jaguar clan has defeated and defended the honor of the ancient whatever. And it was gibberish, and I know I probably shouldn't give a shit, you know, because it's a mech game. But then to make up for it, the mech part itself was almost too complicated to really be fun. I found I was spending more time not shooting than shooting to save my heat and stuff like that. So I really didn't like it, and I've enjoyed MechWarrior a lot, but this one I feel like was one maybe just for the fans, which sucks. Kind of pushed me away from it, but I was excited to play it, and ended up kind of just being a kind of a broad disappointment because of those two things.
Yeah, that's a shame. As someone who enjoyed like the bits of MechWarrior 2 he played as a kid,
Yeah,
you know, I've been looking for an excuse to pick up a mech game, and it just seems like this isn't
I
it.
would pass on this one. I mean, I think the regular MechWarrior 5 wasn't as much as this one, but this one, if you, oh, this is gonna sound stupid, but like all the like these like future, they're all like talk about how they're like clones of these great leaders, and you know, I have the seed of the great, you know, whatever inside of me. That is why I am named Jaden. You're like, what? The main character's name is Jaden, and he talks about it's because he carries like the gene seed of the great leader Jaden inside of him and stuff. It's just bonkers the way they kind of talk about some of the stuff. It has a very like I've played Warhammer, so don't get me wrong, but it has a very like Nazi kind of feel to it almost. And I don't know if that's a BattleTech thing or like a MechWarrior thing or whatever. But it's kind of like, you know, like there's a lot about the made about the lineage of where these people are coming from, and like of course you carry his genes, that's why you are brash in combat and stuff like that. I was like, that's right, I don't
Oh
like that.
no.
I don't like that. But yeah, so yeah, there you go. I'm guessing it's probably lore accurate to, you know, BattleTech, which I think came out in like the 80s, but it feels very kind of gross, I guess.
That's really a disappointment. I'll have to find a different mech game to satisfy my my mech
Yeah.
needs. I was gonna suggest Daemon X Machina, but that game is also kind of trash. So
Or I don't know how people like that. I don't know if that got two souls, like probably, I'm sure.
Armored Core 6 is great. It is
Is it?
not very much like the Souls game
Mhm.
for the most part. It's mission based, so you just kind of load into a mission, and if you want to go back and grind other earlier missions for money, you can. I wrote a review of it on the Avocado. If you look it up. My partner is currently playing through it and digging it, but it has the problem where the difficulty spikes are kind of weird. Like you'll go through and you'll just like blast through a mission in like a minute, and it'll be trivial, and then the next mission will have a boss fight where it's like, you know, bend over and prepare yourself. You're about to get your ass whipped. for a couple of hours till you figure out this boss's patterns. Or it can be. It really depends on how quickly you figure it out, or whether you realize what loadouts you can do. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's good, but it's different.
MechWarrior is more about balancing your heat with what your mech can do, and like a lot of times the mech itself feels like you're just sitting there waiting for things to be within the range to do the things that your mech can do, which is a weird for a mech combat game to just be sitting there, and I guess like there's a lot of like builds and stuff, and it's like these are your missiles, these are this, you're that, but like the missions themselves, you don't really know like what's gonna happen, so you don't know, do I use my missiles on this guy, is this the last guy, the first guy, or 10 more things gonna drop? So you're always constantly hanging out and not wanting to use all your weapons, and because of that you're hoping your allies do something, which 9 times they don't, and then you'll use your stuff and then you'll spend the rest of the time kind of like moping around the map looking for a repair bay, and there's like an actual repair bay on the map you go into and it repairs you. But yeah, so I don't know. I mean, it's probably, if you get really, really into it, maybe it's a little bit better. But as someone who's just looking to blow stuff up in a mech, I was very turned on by this game.
That's a shame. All right, let's talk about our surprises and close out this episode talking about things that were maybe a little bit of a shock to us in 2024. So I got to all my surprises this year were pleasant. So the few that I want to mention, one was New York Times new word game Strands, which is kind of like a twist on a word search. It's really clever. It's really enjoyable. I've been playing it every day, having a good time with it. Another one is by Bandai Namco. So what they've done this year is they put out 3 games for free that were made as projects for their trainees. The one that got the most press was Duranka Wonka, where you play as a naughty Pomeranian in kind of goat simulator like. And your goal is to essentially just ruin someone's house. It's very funny, but it's it's very disposable. There's another one called Boomerode, which was a platformer where you make your own rails that you grind on. Cool idea, but not well executed. But they had one genuinely really good one called Not a Lot, where you play as a robot who can possess other robots and use their abilities to solve like action stealth puzzles. And it was really clever. It was only about an hour long, and it was really fantastic. So yeah, I'm really glad that Bandai Namco put out these games for free, and especially Not a Lot was a really pleasant surprise. And finally, my one surprise that's not a video game but game related is Jason Schreier's new game, Play Nice. I'm on the record as not liking Jason Schreier's second book. I liked his first book a lot, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. His second book, Press Reset, I had a lot of problems with. I think...
You're talking about his
it's
book
very...
Play Nice, right? Okay,
yeah, his book Play
game.
Nice.
I was like, he made a game, but yeah.
Oh, sorry, his book Play Nice. Yeah, his first book, Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, really great. Press Reset. What I'll say about it is that it's very clear that he couldn't get interviews with people he wanted to interview, and he probably should have spiked the stories that he couldn't tell fully. But he decided to fill up that book anyway, and it did not work out very well. Play Nice, though, is fantastic. And I'm saying this as someone who has never played a single Blizzard game. This story is fascinating. It's exceedingly well told. He's interviewed pretty much everyone that you would expect him to have interviewed. And you get this really nice, well-rounded picture and nuanced portrait of what happened at that studio from its inception to its eventual purchase by Microsoft. Really, really fantastic read. And if you liked his previous books, especially if you like Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, I think you'll get a really good kick out of this one. LittleMac, what were your surprises?
I've been thinking about this, and I don't know that I have a great answer. But I will say the one thing that was a pleasant surprise to me is that both Princess Peach and Princess Zelda got to star in games in
Oh yeah,
2024.
It's been a really long. Princess Peach's last starring outing was, let's say, problematic.
Super Princess Peach was, where she goes to the Island of Emotions, or I can't remember what it's actually called, but yeah, that game is all about using different emotion powers, and you can see why. Maybe if this is
Not so fondly
the only
remembered
game
these
that the girl,
days.
they've never remade it, they've never brought it back. I remember it being pretty fun. I think I actually played it on the DS, but you can kind of see. I think that look at Peach getting to basically play dress up and be a swordswoman and a ninja and a samurai and so I think that was a better approach to giving Peach her own game. And I have often been one who argues that that it's people complain, oh, it's just another Zelda game about a damsel in distress, and that seems like, except for maybe the first two Zelda games, seems like a bad reading to me, because the least active role she plays after that second game is basically psychically directing her own rescue. And then when she's not the one who's like, guiding Link to being the hero, she's doing something. Like, she has a very active role in, say, Skyward Sword or the Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom games. But so I didn't necessarily expect them to ever give her a starring role in like a mainline Zelda, especially. But I'm glad they did. And so far, like I said, I mean, it's my game of the year.
Yeah, I'm really glad that they're finally giving their leading ladies a spotlight. And like, I wish it weren't in games that felt so spin-offy, for lack of a better term. But maybe this is this will provide the impetus to give them even bigger roles in the future.
I think that I think with Super Princess Peach, that's absolutely like a spin-off. It's a lower budget, like not Nintendo in-house developed title. I think the Zelda game to me feels very like it's done in the kind of Game Boy remake engine, but it does feel to me like a mainline Zelda. I will say that.
Was that also done? Was that done in house, or was that like Acquire worked on it? Or was that Nintendo in house?
That's a great question.
My understanding is it was sort of a third or second party. I think they're called Izzo or something.
Developed by Nintendo and Grezzo. Cooperative.
Yeah.
Oh, it was Grezzo.
Yeah.
Okay,
Zelda
it was Grezzo.
helped with it. It wasn't entire. Like, they didn't. I don't know if they didn't trust them or if they just felt that it's too important a franchise to not have some involvement with or what. But they didn't. They weren't involved.
Yeah, like Aonuma San
Nintendo's
was the producer.
Yeah, Nintendo's been doing this thing where they partner with external studios and effectively like send a strike team over to that studio to kind of assist with like like overall IP compatibility and stuff like that. So it's what they did with Pikmin 4, mostly done by aiding, but with a bunch of Nintendo developers helping. I don't know if they had the same arrangement with Princess Peach or if that was entirely good feel with some very minor direction. But it seems like this is what they're going to be doing going forward, is using external studios and then sending people over to help.
I think that's always been their kind of their approach, because I know I've read the stories of them sending Miyamoto over to talk with Retro and Metroid Prime, where he was the one who was like, just make it first person,
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Did not know that. All right. Skeletons, what about your surprises?
I think for me, one surprise was, like I said, I started playing Dark Tide on PS5. That actually came out last year, but the PS5 release came shortly after a big overhaul of the systems. And it's Warhammer 40k Dark Tide. It's made by Fat Shark, and it's basically a sort of a pseudo-sequel to their Vermintide games. And it's the same kind of Left 4 Dead kind of structure with progression. But they've overhauled it in a way that I think makes the progression make a lot more sense as a fit for a Left 4 Dead style game. Instead of having preset characters, you pick archetypes. You can name them, you can dress them up, and all that. And as you play, you level up and you kind of build out a skill tree. As you play, you get items, and you can get items randomly from finishing missions, so you can do a loot chase if you want. But you can also just take your items and go over to, if you've got a gun or whatever you like, just go over to the crafting equivalent, pay some money and upgrade it, and you're done. And as you use the weapons, you unlock more perks and upgrade those perks. And you can just slap those on the weapon to make it do whatever you want it to do. So, like, I've been playing as a psyker, who is like a psychic wizard kind of a thing. I gave him a chain lightning ability, so he can clear crowds with his ability. For a secondary weapon, it's a staff that uses his psychic power to do like a strong bolt for single target damage when he uses it. And then he carries a big two-handed sword that he can charge up to do like a horizontal blade. So I've got this good crowd control build that doesn't use any ammo, which frees up ammo for my party. And all of that is just with weapons that I like, that I picked, that I leveled up, and the choices I made in the tree. And it's not, it seems overwhelming at first, but as you play, you're like, oh, I just play it the way I want to play it. I invest in the things I like. And so even if the AI director screws us over, like the time my team got like knocked off a bridge by a combination of exploding barrels and some sort of a troll monster, it wasn't wasting time. I got my experience and my stuff, and I was able to, bank that, and it works. It's just kind of a fun experience because of it. And I thought that was a very pleasant surprise, particularly because I think in Vermintide and Vermintide 2, the progression felt. You were always asking, why did Left 4 Dead need this? This is cumbersome and annoying.
Yeah, that's the sense I got playing Vermintide 2, and it's why my co-op group bounced off it pretty quickly. It just felt like that layer of progression that was on there wasn't necessary. And it would be a good enough time to just let us loose on the levels and see what happens.
Yeah. And Darktide, like I said, it overwhelms you with how it appears at first, but it's actually a pretty simple, just like I said, you just upgrade what you want to upgrade, you just pick the perks that match how you want to play. It just kind of makes sense.
Yeah, really glad to hear that. Any other surprises?
One I'm going to throw out, I just have not invested enough time in it. It came out of early access. It's a weird little game called Songs of Silence, which I would describe as Heroes of Might and Magic plus an auto battler.
I think you're speaking Kappa's language.
Possibly.
I love that's probably my favorite series.
But, well, if you like that, I'm also going to throw out sort of unrelated Songs of Conquest, which is just straightforward Heroes of Might and Magic with beautiful pixel art. It's weird that they have Songs of Conquest is the one that's just straight up Heroes of Might and Magic. And that's a good one if you like Heroes of Might and Magic. But the one I'm talking about is Songs of Silence, and it's annoying that they have such similar names. But I want to highlight this one because it's a weird setup where when you have a battle, your armies clash, and they just automatically fight. And all you do is you have little cards, and you play the cards, and they're on timers, or they might be single use or whatever, and you use them to kind of swing the flow of the battle however you want. So battles are very fast. And the reason I found it such a pleasant surprise is that's an interesting mechanic, but it's also a gorgeous game. Like, it's just all this very painterly style. I don't really know how to describe it. Like when you look at the visuals, but it's just a little indie game, and it kind of blew me away with how it looked. In a year where, like I said, bigger studios have kind of disappointed me a little bit on the visual side of things. Like, why am I not seeing this kind of pleasant art in all of my games?
Yeah, I'm glad that indie games are able to pull off stuff like this, and I don't want to say put the bigger guys to shame, but show that you can take some of the ideas from their inspirations and twist them and make something really cool and worthwhile. Kappa,
Oh boy.
what are
Okay.
your surprises?
After 11 years, $200 million, and at the gunpoint of the Singapore government, Skull and Bones came out. The first 4A game in history.
Quadruple A.
Quadruple A game actually hit the street.
Did you actually play it?
God, no. I played the demo, and I barely got off the first island. I was like, this sucks. Everything that you would think is fun about being a pirate is not in this game. It's baffling. But yeah, no, I'm just surprised it came out. I guess it had to, but I thought they would probably, fart around on it for a couple more years. But yeah, there you go. That finally came out.
I do not understand Ubisoft. I don't know what is going on over there.
Yeah. I think they're looking for a buyer. I have that feeling. I don't know why. Maybe because they're always pushing that Ubi Plus thing on Microsoft. Maybe that's I feel like they're trying to sell something. Surprisingly, I mean, I think Microsoft Pivot, I think was a surprising thing. I've been seeing more and more articles that are saying what I've been saying. That is, you know what? They're ahead of the times on this one. I think eventually you're going to be seeing this, streamer games, play it from home, play it on a couch, play it from a phone. I think that's the future. I really do. So we'll see what happens. I don't know that Sony and Nintendo would agree, but I think Microsoft is just kind of trying to get ahead of the game on this one. I think it's not a terrible idea, though.
Are you talking about?
I don't think it's a terrible idea. I just think that the ad campaign is insane.
Ad campaign's
And
better.
they need a different ad campaign to sell this idea.
So I was reading that, from marketing standpoint too. People were like, "Oh, this is a great campaign. It's a very thorough campaign. This is actually a really good campaign." But I was like, I don't think so. But apparently, it's kind of well received in certain circles, like advertising circles, I guess. Anyway, yeah, I think they're ahead of it. I think they're ahead of the curve. I think not having to have a console to play games is where everybody's going to be in 5 years. And I don't feel tied to my consoles. I don't love having to have a box in my room. It doesn't matter to me. If I can play those same games streaming wise, I'll do it in a minute. And then my last one, my game of the year last year, Fortnite. They're still doing it, man. That Valorant mode in Fortnite is the most fun I've ever had with a Valorant/CS:GO type game. It's plays fast to me. It doesn't rely on having 10 million smoke screens and mollies and all those other things, and you don't have to do the econ rounds as much because of how they balanced it. So I actually really like where Fortnite keeps going, and I would not have had on my, that Fortnite would be coming out with a competitor Valorant this year. But yep, they sure did, and it's actually really, really fun. So good for them for keeping that up.
Fortnite is almost more a platform now than a game.
Yeah. I mean, they've added just so many weird things to it over the years now that when you load it up, it doesn't even default to the battle royale anymore. It'll show you oh, hey, here's a new racing game that came out for their racing mode, or stuff like that. It's really weird. The Lego game got a survival mode that's really fun. It just keeps kind of spiraling more and more into this platform delivery system, but it's all free. I don't understand it because so many other people or games I think would kind of figure out a way to why is this free and in every other game it's not? You know what I mean?
It's at a certain point they need to keep adding new modes because they need new ways to show off skins. Because why do you how does Fortnite make money? Skins, right? So
for the new mode, it's basically in first person, and you can play any skin in that first person mode, right? So
yeah, so this is you showing off skins to other people.
Exactly. It's
the knowledge that other people are seeing you running around as Peter Griffin.
Yeah, I am. You're know me. I'll be Godzilla in about a week. But yeah, it's really fun. I like that it's continued to kind of just evolve. Because I think outside of our circle of video games, I don't think we know or talk about where Fortnite is, and it's in a good spot right now.
That's really neat. And I think that brings this episode to a close. So, if you'd like to keep up to date with the podcast, you can follow us on our website at avocadogamescast.wordpress.com. On that site, we post each episode along with a link dump that fact checks all of our blathering. You can also subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify. And Spotify. You can do all three. Just search for Avocado Gamescast. And make sure you check out the Avocado, the community that spawned this podcast at the-avocado.org. Just before we go, first of all, thank you to Drinking with Skeletons for making his podcast debut. It's been really nice having you. And just before we go, a big thank you to our listeners for sticking with us in 2024. We've loved this year delivering you analysis and commentary, even though the industry kept delivering awful news to us.
Sometimes as we were recording.
Yeah, like we'd find out about a layoff announcement while we were recording the podcast. We'd be like, oh my God, this is not good stuff. But this has been a super fun thing for us that we've been doing now. I just counted 8.5 years of podcasting. At the time we started this podcast, I was living in New York. I moved to Los Angeles, then moved back to New York, and I moved back to Canada in the time that we've been recording this podcast. And I've lived in 3 different places in Canada over the course of recording this podcast. So my life has changed a lot since we started this thing. We're going to keep going in 2025, so stay tuned, and I hope you all had a wonderful holiday since you're probably listening to this in January, and I hope you have a good 2025 ahead.